Long before the Great Pyramid cuts its perfect line against the sky, Egypt's dead are already shaping the future. At the desert edge of the Nile Valley, bodies are placed in shallow graves, curled on their sides and surrounded by pottery, food, tools, ornaments, and objects whose usefulness seems intended to continue beyond the final breath. The desert does something remarkable to them. Heat, sand, and extreme dryness preserve flesh naturally, holding the human form together long after life has ended. To the living, that survival cannot have seemed meaningless. It suggested that death did not erase a person completely. Something remained, something recognizable, something that might still require nourishment, protection, memory, and a secure place within the order of the world. These earliest graves are not pyramids, and they're not yet accompanied by temples, paved causeways, or monumental walls. They are pits cut into the earth, sometimes lined with reeds, wood, mud brick, or stone. Yet the essential idea is already present. The tomb is more than a place to remove the dead from daily life. It is a threshold where the visible world touches another condition of existence. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that this belief grows more elaborate as communities become wealthier and more politically organized. Graves expand, offerings multiply, and some burials receive objects of exceptional craftsmanship. Differences among the dead begin to reveal differences in power among the living. The Nile landscape strengthens this way of thinking. Egypt is a country of contrast fertile black soil beside pale desert, annual flood beside permanent stone. The West, where the sun descends, becomes associated with the dead, while the East suggests return and renewal. These meanings are not rigid rules, but they become powerful habits of sacred geography. Cemeteries gather on the desert margins, beyond the fields yet close enough for the living to approach, present offerings, perform rituals, and return home. By the late 4th millennium BCE, Egypt is changing rapidly. Communities along the Nile are becoming parts of larger political systems. Elite tombs at places such as Abydos and Nakada show growing concentrations of wealth and authority. Imported materials, finely worked vessels, and ceremonial objects reveal rulers able to command resources beyond a single settlement. The person buried at the center may represent a lineage, a territory, or an emerging kingship. Death becomes political because royal burial displays who controls labor, trade, ritual knowledge, and memory. This is one of the quieter truths behind the later pyramids. Their story does not begin with a sudden decision to stack millions of stones into a geometric mountain. It begins with the gradual transformation of the grave into an institution. A ruler's burial becomes an event that organizes craftsmen, officials, priests, farmers, transport crews, and storerooms. Tombs acquire multiple chambers, walls, offering places, and architectural features that imitate buildings used in life. In some early royal burials, the underground spaces resemble a house rebuilt beneath the earth. Food containers, furniture, and ritual equipment create an environment in which royal identity can continue. The dead king remains a presence requiring maintenance. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. At Abydos, the early royal cemetery gives some of the clearest evidence for this changing relationship between burial and kingship. Tombs associated with rulers of Egypt's first dynasties are cut into the desert at el-Kab. Many were disturbed in antiquity, and their exact contents are difficult to reconstruct, but their scale and arrangement reveal widening ambition. Storage rooms surround central burial spaces. Nearby ceremonial enclosures may have played roles in the funeral and continuing cult. Scholars still debate how some of these structures were used, yet the larger pattern is difficult to miss. Royal death is distributed across a sacred landscape, rather than confined to one underground chamber. That pattern anticipates the pyramid complex. Later monuments will also divide their functions among different spaces. One area will be associated with burial, another with offerings, another with processions, another with arrival from the river, priests, storage rooms, subsidiary burials, symbolic structures, and ritual courtyards will surround the central monument. The pyramid will dominate the horizon, but it will never tell the whole story by itself. Its ancestors are already teaching Egypt to construct death as a system. The form most closely associated with this early stage is the mastaba, a modern Arabic word meaning bench. These structures have rectangular plans, flat roofs, and sloping sides, with burial chambers below ground and a visible superstructure above. They provide places where the living can present offerings and preserve the identity of the deceased through names, images, and ritual access. They are not simply unfinished pyramids, but they establish principles. Later builders will magnify protected burial below, permanent monument above, and architecture transformed into social memory. Newly examined early tombs with walls thicker at the base and narrowing upward have renewed interest in how such forms developed. No single discovery provides a complete missing link from pit grave to pyramid, and the evidence remains incomplete. Still, these structures show builders experimenting with stability, height, enclosure, and visual authority long before Giza. The pyramid's shape is not born from one isolated flash of inspiration. It emerges from generations of practical construction and religious imagination working together. At the same time, kingship itself is changing. The ruler becomes more than a political leader. He stands at the center of a sacred order, performing rituals for the gods, maintaining justice, protecting the land, and helping preserve the balance later Egyptians call Mat. His death, therefore, creates a problem greater than the loss of one man. If the king connects the human and divine worlds, his transformation after death must be carefully managed. The funeral is not merely a farewell. It is a transfer of identity, authority, and sacred status. This helps explain why royal tombs grow far beyond ordinary human need. Monumental burial makes an argument. It declares that the king's authority belongs not only to temporary command, but to the order of creation, the cycle of the sun, the continuity of the state, and the permanence of the land. By preserving the king, feeding his cult, repeating his name, and placing him within a sacred landscape, Egypt also preserves the institution he embodies. The earliest tombs reveal a tension that will remain throughout the Pyramid Age. A burial must be accessible enough for ritual but protected enough to survive. Offerings require contact, security requires concealment, memory requires visibility, preservation requires isolation. Egyptian funerary architecture repeatedly tries to solve these conflicting demands. Chambers descend while monuments rise. Entrances are blocked and passages sealed. Yet offering places remain available to priests. The dead king must be both unreachable and continually served. By the beginning of the Third Dynasty, Egypt already possesses centuries of experience in royal ritual, administration, quarrying, transport, and large-scale labor. The Nile can move people and materials. Officials can organize provisions. Craftsmen can shape stone with extraordinary precision. Builders understand mud brick, timber, limestone, and the behavior of walls under weight, The conceptual foundations are also in place. The ruler requires a protected burial, a ceremonial landscape, a lasting cult, and an architecture capable of expressing eternal authority. What does not yet exist is the pyramid as the world now recognizes it. That transformation will require one king, one unprecedented complex, and a decision to reproduce in stone forms once built largely from perishable materials. At Saqqara, the flat tomb of the early ruler is about to rise in stages until burial architecture stops hugging the desert floor and begins to climb toward the sky. At Saqqara, the change begins not with a finished pyramid, but with a low rectangular monument that still belongs to the older world. Beneath it lies a deep shaft, underground galleries, storage chambers, corridors, and a burial space intended for King Djoser. Above it stands what appears at first to be a large mastaba, familiar in principle even if ambitious in scale. Then the design changes. The structure is enlarged, more stone is added, the walls rise, the plan is altered again. Layer after layer, one mastaba is placed conceptually upon another, until the monument becomes something Egypt has never seen before, a 6-stepped tower of limestone climbing from the desert floor. The step pyramid does not appear as a perfect idea executed in a single uninterrupted act. Its masonry preserves evidence of experimentation. Different building phases remain locked inside the final form, showing how the project expanded as its possibilities became clear. What begins as an enlarged royal tomb becomes the dominant feature of an immense ceremonial complex. This gradual transformation matters because it reveals that pyramid architecture is not born fully formed. It is discovered through construction. The architect traditionally associated with this achievement is Imhotep, a high official whose later reputation grows far beyond the surviving evidence from Djoser's reign. Centuries after his death, he is remembered as a wise man, healer, and eventually a divine figure. Later traditions magnify him into an almost legendary genius. The precise limits of his personal role remain uncertain, and large monuments are never the work of one mind alone. Surveyors, quarrymen, masons, sculptors, administrators, priests, and experienced builders all contribute knowledge. Yet Imhotep's name is unusually prominent for an official of the period, and he represents the intellectual ambition behind the complex, the decision to translate royal ritual into an architecture of unprecedented permanence. Earlier elite structures had relied heavily on mud brick, timber, reed matting, and other materials rooted in Egyptian building traditions. At Saqqara, these familiar forms are copied in limestone. Stone ceilings imitate logs. Carved doorways reproduce bundles of reeds. Walls are shaped as though they were made from materials that could bend, rot, or burn, even though the new versions are cut from rock. This is one of the most revealing details in the entire complex. The builders are not abandoning the old world. They are preserving it by turning it into stone. The result resembles a royal residence reconstructed for eternity. The enormous enclosure wall, more than 10 meters high in places, surrounds courtyards, shrines, passages, chapels, terraces, and symbolic buildings. Much of this architecture is not designed for ordinary occupation. Some structures have solid interiors or narrow spaces that could never function like normal rooms. They are architectural images rather than practical buildings, permanent representations of places and ceremonies required by the king after death. This is where the step pyramid becomes much more than an unusually large grave. Beneath the monument lies the burial system, but around it spreads a ritual environment built to sustain royal transformation. The complex brings together protected interment, ceremonial performance, divine kingship, memory, and political display. It does not force Egypt to choose among tomb, temple, palace, or symbol. It combines their meanings. A narrow entrance leads through a passage lined with stone columns carved to resemble bundled reeds. The columns are attached to the walls, as if the builders are still learning how freely stone supports can stand. Beyond them opens a broad courtyard associated with the king's jubilee, the said festival. In life, this ceremony renews royal strength and confirms the ruler's ability to continue governing. Its exact early form is imperfectly understood, and scholars still debate how the Saqqara spaces correspond to actual ceremonies. Yet the complex clearly preserves the idea that Djoser must continue to perform kingship after death. Rows of symbolic chapels stand along the festival court. Their doors and facades present the appearance of buildings, but many are not accessible interiors. They serve as permanent ritual scenery. The dead king does not need an ordinary city inhabited by living residents. He needs an eternal model of the sacred institutions and territories over which he rules. Near the step pyramid stands a small sealed chamber known as the Serdab. Inside, a seated statue of Djoser once looked outward through 2 holes cut into the wall. The statue provides a physical form through which the king's presence can remain connected to offerings and ritual activity. The narrow openings may have allowed that presence to observe ceremonies, receive incense, or remain symbolically aware of the living world. The arrangement is quiet, almost intimate, despite the immense monument beside it. Behind stone walls, the king continues to watch. Below the pyramid, the atmosphere changes completely. A shaft descends into the bedrock toward a burial chamber built with granite, while kilometers of underground passages extend into darkness. Some galleries include thousands of stone vessels, many already old when they were placed there. Their presence may connect Djoser with earlier rulers, inherited ritual objects, or royal ancestors. No single explanation fully accounts for the enormous collection, but it gives the underground complex the character of a repository of kingship itself. Sections of the subterranean chambers are decorated with blue-green faience tiles arranged to imitate reed matting. The effect evokes palace interiors, giving the king an eternal residence beneath the desert. Relief panels show Djoser engaged in ritual movement, still active, still performing the duties that affirm royal power. Burial here is not imagined as stillness. The dead ruler must move, appear, receive, renew, and rule. South of the main pyramid stands another enigmatic structure called the South Tomb. It contains its own underground passages and decorated chambers, yet its practical function remains uncertain. It may have served as a symbolic burial, a repository for part of the king's body or royal regalia, a monument connected with the southern kingdom, or an architectural counterpart required by ritual. The evidence remains incomplete. What it demonstrates most clearly is that one physical burial chamber could not contain every meaning attached to the king's death. Even the step pyramid's height carries several possible associations. Its stacked form may recall a vast stairway, a primeval mound emerging from the waters of creation, or the rising authority of the king. Later religious texts describe royal ascent to the sky. But those texts were written centuries after Djoser, so they cannot simply be projected backward without caution. Still, the movement from horizontal mastaba to vertical monument changes the relationship between royal burial and the landscape. The tomb no longer merely occupies the desert, it commands it. Its pale limestone surfaces would have caught the sunlight and remained visible from far across the valley. approaching Saqqara from cultivated land. A traveller would see an artificial mountain standing beyond the boundary of life and desert. It announces the ruler's ability to mobilize stone, labour, food, specialized knowledge, and time on a scale no earlier monument had displayed. Yet calling it simple propaganda would miss its deeper role. Political power, religious belief, and funerary necessity are not separate categories in Djoser's Egypt. Each reinforces the others. The complex also transforms the administration that builds it. Large numbers of workers must be provisioned. Quarries must be opened and managed. Blocks must be transported, measured, shaped, and set in increasingly ambitious arrangements. Mistakes become lessons embedded in stone. The project creates technical experience that later king will inherit. It establishes not only a new monument, but a new national capacity. Djoser's pyramid changes what a royal tomb can be. It is a burial place concealed beneath a mountain of masonry, a ceremonial arena where kingship is renewed, a permanent palace for the transformed ruler, and a declaration that royal authority can outlast the body that once exercised it. Its forms are experimental, sometimes symbolic, sometimes structurally cautious, but its ambition is unmistakable. After Saqqara, Egypt can no longer return entirely to the old horizon of flat royal tombs. The problem has changed. Builders now know how to raise a king above the desert in stone. The question is no longer whether a monument can climb, but whether its steps can be smoothed into one continuous slope, creating not a stairway of stacked stages, but a perfect geometric mountain. The smooth-sided pyramid begins as an act of concealment. At Meidum, builders take a stepped monument and gradually fill the spaces between its rising stages, covering the core with a continuous outer surface. The intention is no longer to display a staircase of stone, but to create a single sloping form, sharp-edged and visually complete. What survives today looks very different. A tall central tower rises from a vast mound of fallen masonry, giving the monument the appearance of an enormous ruined fortress. Medieval observers compared it to a mountain with several remaining steps. Modern visitors see what seems almost like the skeleton of a pyramid after its outer body has collapsed. The monument is often associated first with King Huni and later with Sneferu, the founder of the 4th dynasty, though the precise sequence of responsibility remains debated. There is no simple inscription explaining who began each stage or exactly when the design was altered. What the masonry does reveal is a long process of enlargement. The pyramid began with a stepped core, was expanded, and eventually received casing intended to turn it into a true pyramid. The transformation was both architectural and ideological. The king's monument was no longer merely rising in layers. It was becoming a pure geometric surface, a man-made mountain whose sides moved uninterrupted from earth toward a single point. Why much of the outer structure failed is still disputed. Earlier explanations imagined a catastrophic collapse during construction, perhaps forcing the builders to abandon the site suddenly. Later, archaeological observations suggest that large portions may have remained standing for centuries, and that stone removal contributed heavily to the ruin visible today. Structural weaknesses may still have played a role. The outer additions were placed around an earlier stepped core, and some masonry rested on sloping surfaces rather than bonding deeply into the monument. No single explanation fully accounts for every stage of deterioration, but Meidum clearly taught builders that appearance alone could not guarantee stability. A smooth face had to be integrated into the body of the pyramid, not simply wrapped around it. Inside, the burial route also reveals changing ideas. A passage descends from an entrance high on the northern face, then rises into a corbel-roofed chamber built above ground level within the masonry. This arrangement marks a departure from the deep subterranean world beneath Djoser's monument. The burial chamber is now drawn into the pyramid itself. The king's resting place is becoming part of the artificial mountain, rather than lying only under it. Nearby stand remains of a mortuary temple, enclosure walls, a causeway, and subsidiary structures. Their survival is fragmentary, yet they show that Maydom was never intended as an isolated mass of stone. It belonged to the developing pattern of a royal funerary complex, where burial, offering, procession, and remembrance were distributed across connected spaces. The pyramid was the dominant form, but ritual life extended beyond its base. Sneferu's reign is extraordinary because it appears to contain not one attempt at pyramid building, but several. The total volume of stone associated with his major projects may exceed even that used in the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Whether every monument served as an actual burial place is uncertain, but the scale of activity suggests a sustained program of experimentation. Under Sneferu, pyramid building becomes an evolving science practiced across the landscape. At Djoser, south of Saqqara, the next great trial rises from the desert. The bent pyramid begins at a steep angle of roughly 54 degrees. About halfway up, however, the slope suddenly changes to a gentler angle, giving the monument its unmistakable double profile. It appears almost as though the pyramid begins in confidence and then pauses, reconsidering its own ambition. The traditional explanation is structural alarm. Cracks, shifting masonry, or pressure within the chambers may have warned builders that continuing at the original angle risked failure. Reducing the slope lowered the final height and weight, yet the full story remains uncertain. The change may also have reflected scheduling pressure, design revision, or lessons learned from Maydom. It is possible that several concerns converged. Ancient engineers did not leave a technical report describing the decision, so the monument itself remains the principal witness. Its interior supports the impression of active experimentation. The bent pyramid contains two separate systems of chambers, one entered from the north and another from the west. Both use high corbelled ceilings, in which successive courses of stone project inward until they nearly meet overhead. A connecting passage was later cut between the systems. The purpose of this unusual arrangement is not fully understood. It may represent a change in burial plans, ritual duplication, or an attempt to redistribute internal stresses. What survives suggests that the builders were solving practical and symbolic problems at the same time. The bent pyramid also preserves much of its smooth outer casing, making it one of the best places to imagine how the Great Pyramids originally appeared. Its limestone surface still reflects light, though weathering has softened the effect. In antiquity, the complete monument would have looked far more luminous, with clean faces rising above the desert like a carefully cut form rather than a pile of blocks. The familiar rough steps visible on most pyramids today are largely the exposed inner masonry left after casing stones were removed. Beside the main monument stands a smaller satellite pyramid, while a causeway connects the upper complex with a valley temple. Relief fragments from the valley temple show royal ceremonies and personified estates bringing offerings. These scenes reveal the administrative foundation beneath the sacred architecture. Agricultural lands, settlements, workers, and officials supported the king's cult. Eternal ritual depended on a very earthly system of production. A short distance away, Sneferu's builders tried again. The Red Pyramid rises at a shallower, consistent angle from base to summit. It lacks the dramatic change of slope seen in its neighbour, and is generally regarded as the first successfully completed true pyramid. Its modern name comes from the reddish limestone visible in its exposed core, though it was originally covered with pale casing stone. Ancient names linked monuments to royal appearance and glory. Their current colours often reflect what later quarrying left behind. The entrance lies high on the northern face. A descending corridor leads to a sequence of corbel-roofed chambers, each tall, narrow, and carefully aligned. The final chamber sits higher within the body of the monument. Here, the lessons of Medum and the bent pyramid appear to have been absorbed. The angle is more conservative. The internal spaces are arranged with greater confidence. The mass of stone is enormous, yet the structure remains coherent. Still, the Red Pyramid is not merely an engineering prototype for Giza. It is a complete royal monument with its own ritual context. Its construction demonstrates that the smooth-sided pyramid had become an established expression of kingship. Geometry now carries religious and political force. 4 triangular faces rise from a square base and converge toward a single apex, reducing a mountain of individual stones into one comprehensible shape. The form may have evoked solar rays, the primeval mound of creation, or a stairway transformed into a continuous path toward the sky. Later Egyptian religion makes these associations increasingly visible, but scholars still debate how fully they were developed during Sneferu's reign. The safest conclusion is that the shape gathered meanings rather than possessing only one. It could be a tomb and an image of rebirth, a royal monument and a cosmic form, an engineering achievement and a visible claim to divine order. These projects also reveal something easily overlooked. Failure was not hidden from history because experimentation was part of the process. Ancient Egyptian builders did not inherit perfect knowledge. They tested angles, changed plans, reinforced chambers, altered masonry, and learned from monuments that behaved in unexpected ways. Their achievement becomes more impressive, not less, when stripped of the myth that every solution appeared instantly. By the end of Sneferu's reign, Egypt possesses the technical vocabulary required for the next leap. Builders understand how to establish a vast square base, align a monument with remarkable precision, raise smooth faces at a stable angle, create chambers within immense loads, and connect the central pyramid to temples, causeways, and river access. The artificial mountain has reached maturity. The next generation will take these lessons north to the edge of the Giza plateau. There, the scale will expand again, and the pyramid will cease to be one royal experiment among several. It will become the center of a landscape of giants. Giza begins as a choice of horizon. The plateau rises above the cultivated valley, close enough to the Nile for transport and ritual access, yet high enough to stand apart from ordinary life. From its edge, the land drops toward fields, settlements, and waterways, while the desert extends westward into the realm associated with the dead. It is a place where visibility becomes power. A monument built here does not merely occupy space, it governs the skyline. Khufu, the son of Sneferu, selects this plateau for a project that pushes every lesson of the previous generation toward an almost unsettling extreme. The Great Pyramid rises from a square base, aligned with astonishing accuracy to the cardinal directions. Its original height reaches about 146 meters. Its sides are faced with fine white limestone, producing a surface far smoother and brighter than the stepped ruin seen today. At the summit, a pyramidion may once have completed the geometry, though no secure original capstone survives. In sunlight, the monument would have appeared less like a rough mountain and more like an immense plane of light. Its construction required millions of blocks, most quarried locally from the plateau itself. Finer casing stone came from Tura across the Nile, while granite used in the internal chambers travelled from Aswan far to the south. The scale is so great that later imagination often treats the monument as if it must stand outside normal human history. Yet the archaeological landscape around it points in the opposite direction. Quarries, transport routes, worker settlements, bakeries, storage areas, administrative markings, and cemeteries all place the pyramid firmly inside the world of organized human labor. The Great Pyramid is not alone. Beside it lie subsidiary pyramids, boat pits, mastaba fields, temples, processional spaces, and the tombs of royal relatives and officials. The complex forms the nucleus of a much larger social and sacred landscape. To the east stand smaller pyramids commonly associated with queens, though the identities and precise functions of some remain debated. Nearby mastabas house members of the royal family and high officials who seek burial close to the king. Proximity is not accidental. In death, as in life, position reflects status and access to power. Khufu's causeway once extended toward the valley, linking the high desert complex to a lower temple near the ancient river margin. Much of this system is fragmentary or buried beneath later settlement, but its general pattern is clear. The king's body, ritual equipment, offerings, priests, and ceremonial participants could move through a sequence of spaces from water to desert, from valley temple to mortuary temple, from the world of the living toward the pyramid. The monument's meaning unfolds along that route. A surprising amount of the Giza story lies beneath what no longer exists. The present plateau can make the pyramid seem isolated, surrounded by empty sand and distant modern streets. In the Old Kingdom, the setting was more active. The Nile and its branches approached the complexes more closely. Harbours and basins connected building sites with river traffic. Materials arrived by boat. People moved through a landscape of workshops, houses, temples, storage facilities, tombs, ramps, roads, and administrative stations. Giza was not a silent necropolis under construction. It was a crowded, provisioned, managed environment. Khufu's pyramid establishes the dominant scale, but his successors reshape the plateau into a dynastic landscape. Khafra builds his pyramid nearby, on slightly higher ground. Although it is smaller than Khufu's, its elevated position and steeper appearance can make it seem equally imposing from certain viewpoints. A cap of original casing stone still clings near its summit, offering a rare glimpse of how smooth the pyramids once looked. Khafra's complex preserves more of its ceremonial architecture. The Valley Temple, constructed with massive limestone blocks and lined in places with granite, creates an atmosphere of controlled permanence. Its interior spaces are severe and carefully proportioned. Statues of the king once occupied the temple, including the famous seated image showing Khafra protected by the falcon god Horus. The sculpture expresses the same idea as the architecture. The king is not remembered merely as a dead individual, but as a transformed and divinely supported ruler. The causeway rises from the valley temple toward the mortuary temple beside the pyramid. Nearby, the Great Sphinx faces east across the plateau. Its precise date, symbolism, and relationship to Khafra remain subjects of discussion, but mainstream archaeological interpretation connects it closely with the Fourth Dynasty complex. A lion's body joined to a royal head produces a guardian form of controlled strength. The Sphinx is not simply a decorative addition. It turns the landscape itself into royal imagery. Farther south, Menkaur's pyramid reduces the scale but not the complexity. It is much smaller than the monuments of Khufu and Khafre, yet its lower courses were faced partly with granite, an expensive material transported from Aswan. The unfinished state of some casing blocks preserves evidence of working methods, showing how surfaces were dressed after placement. The complex includes a mortuary temple, valley temple, causeway, and subsidiary pyramids, again reinforcing that the pyramid's purpose cannot be understood from the central stone mass alone. Menkaur's valley temple also yields evidence of royal sculpture and cult activity. Triad statues depict the king beside deities and personifications of regions. These images bind geography, divinity, and kingship together. The ruler stands not only as a person, but as the organizing center of the land. The smaller pyramid therefore does not represent a collapse of meaning. It shows that scale, material, ritual, and symbolism could be balanced differently while preserving the same broad funerary logic. Across the plateau, the three main pyramid complexes create a visual sequence that later generations often interpret as a single master plan. Some alignments are certainly intentional, while others may emerge from topography, available space, and the practical demands of construction. Scholars still debate how much of Giza was conceived as one unified design. The evidence remains incomplete. What is unmistakable is that each king inserts himself into an increasingly powerful ancestral landscape. This concentration of monuments transforms Giza into a theatre of dynasty. Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure do not disappear into separate graves. Their pyramids remain visible together, each reinforcing the legitimacy of the next. The living king builds beside his predecessors and claims continuity with them. Stone makes succession visible. The cost of these projects is immense, but the nature of that cost matters. Older popular accounts often imagined vast populations of enslaved labourers driven by cruelty. Archaeology presents a more complex picture. The workforce appears to have included permanent specialists, rotating labour groups, administrators, craftsmen, transport crews, and agricultural workers serving for part of the year. Their organisation does not make the labour easy, and the state's demands were certainly heavy. But the evidence does not support the familiar image of anonymous slave gangs alone. Giza therefore embodies both human achievement and concentrated authority. The pyramids could not exist without a state capable of directing food, stone, transport, time, and skilled labour toward one sacred objective. They are monuments to cooperation, but also to hierarchy. They reveal what thousands of people can build together and who possesses the power to define that purpose. Their size tempts the modern mind to search for one extraordinary explanation. A royal tomb seems too small an answer for so much stone. Yet this reaction assumes that burial meant only storing a body. At Giza, royal death becomes a national project. The king's burial anchors temples, priesthoods, estates, processions, offerings, ancestral memory, and claims of divine order. The pyramid is enormous because the institution surrounding the dead king is enormous. From the valley, the completed complexes would have presented a carefully staged descent. Boats approached from the river, ceremonies moved through lower temples, causeways climbed toward the plateau, mortuary temples stood against the eastern faces of the pyramids, where offerings maintained the royal cult. Above everything rose the geometric form of the king's transformed existence. The Great Pyramid dominates this world, but its most difficult questions lie inside. Behind its smooth external certainty is a network of passages, chambers, shafts, hidden spaces, and structural choices that still resist complete explanation. The outer form declares perfection. The interior reveals experimentation, revision, and problems solved within millions of tons of stone. The Great Pyramid appears simple only from the outside. 4 faces rise toward a vanished summit, their geometry so controlled that the monument seems almost self-explanatory. Inside, however, the design becomes stranger. Passages climb and descend through the masonry. Chambers occupy different levels. Narrow shafts angle outward toward the faces. Corbelled spaces rise above the principal rooms. Other voids, invisible for millennia, have only recently been detected through particles, radar, ultrasound, and electrical measurements. The exterior promises a single perfect idea. The interior preserves a sequence of decisions. The original entrance lies on the northern face, several meters above the base. From there, a narrow passage descends through the masonry and then into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. It leads toward an unfinished subterranean chamber cut below ground level. The room is rough, irregular, and incomplete, with a pit sunk into its floor and walls that were never fully dressed. Its purpose remains uncertain. It may represent an early burial plan later abandoned, a symbolic underworld chamber, or a stage in a design that changed while construction was already underway. No inscription explains the decision. Partway down the descending passage, another corridor breaks upward into the body of the pyramid. This ascending passage was originally sealed with large granite plugs, creating one of the monument's most deliberate barriers. Beyond it lies the Grand Gallery, a space so unexpected that even its name feels inadequate. The floor rises steeply, while the walls lean inward through successive corbelled courses until the ceiling closes high above. The gallery is narrow but extraordinarily tall, producing the impression of a stone canyon tilted toward the center of the monument. Its function has never been settled beyond doubt. The gallery forms the main approach to the upper chambers, but its architecture seems more elaborate than a corridor requires. Grooves run along the sides. Recesses and cuttings appear in regular patterns. Some scholars have proposed that it helped store or maneuver stone blocks used to seal the ascending route after the burial. Others have suggested that it played a role in the construction process, perhaps supporting a lifting or counterweight system. Such ideas remain debated. What survives shows that the Grand Gallery was carefully designed around movement, load, and access, but no single explanation fully accounts for every feature. Near its lower end, a horizontal passage leads toward the chamber traditionally called the Queen's Chamber. The name is misleading. There is no strong evidence that a queen was ever intended to be buried there. The chamber sits near the pyramid's central axis and has a pointed limestone roof. A large niche cuts into its eastern wall, perhaps once intended for a statue, a ritual object, or another feature now lost. The floor appears unfinished in places, suggesting that the chamber's final use may have changed. From the Queen's Chamber, 2 narrow shafts extend upward through the masonry. They were once described as ventilation channels, but neither originally opened into the chamber itself. Their inner ends were sealed behind thin stone membranes until modern investigators broke through them. Small robotic devices later travelled along parts of the shafts and encountered blocking stones fitted with copper elements. Beyond one of these appeared another small cavity and a second barrier. These discoveries encourage dramatic speculation, but the spaces are too small to support fantasies of hidden treasure chambers. Their significance is more likely symbolic, structural, or ritual, although the evidence remains incomplete. The shafts are among the monument's most mysterious features, because they connect interior space with directions in the sky without serving as ordinary passageways. Some researchers have linked their alignments with stars important in later Egyptian religion, particularly circumpolar stars or regions associated with Orion and Sirius. Others warn that precise stellar interpretations can be overextended, especially when religious texts from later centuries are projected backward onto Khufu's reign. The safest conclusion is that the builders considered orientation important, even if the exact meaning of every angle remains uncertain. Above the Grand Gallery lies the King's Chamber, constructed largely from granite transported hundreds of kilometers from Aswan. Its walls are made from enormous blocks placed with remarkable precision. A lidless granite sarcophagus stands near the western end. It is wider than the chamber's entrance passage, meaning it must have been installed before the room was enclosed. This small practical fact matters. The sarcophagus was not carried in by later visitors. It belonged to the original building sequence. The chamber is austere. There are no surviving wall texts, painted scenes, royal images, or elaborate carvings. For some modern observers, this emptiness seems incompatible with a royal tomb, yet decoration was not standard inside the earliest Great Pyramids. The absence of inscriptions does not remove the chamber from its funerary setting, particularly when the sarcophagus, ceiling systems, mortuary temples, and surrounding cemetery are considered together. Two narrow shafts rise from the king's chamber and eventually reach the outer faces of the pyramid. Unlike those associated with the queen's chamber, these were open into the room. They may have provided ventilation during construction or ritual activity, but practical airflow alone does not explain their carefully maintained path through such a massive structure. Symbolic communication between the king and the sky remains possible, although scholars still debate how such a function should be understood. The ceiling above the king's chamber is flat, formed from immense granite beams. Directly above it, however, lie 5 additional spaces, one stacked over another. The lowest is now known as Davison's chamber, while the upper chambers were entered in the 19th century through tunnels cut with explosives. Their roofs and floors consist of enormous slabs, and the higher space ends in a pointed limestone roof. These chambers were once called relieving chambers because they were thought to redirect the pyramid's weight away from the room below. That description remains useful, though the mechanics are more complex than the name implies. Recent structural and ultrasonic studies examine how the granite blocks fit together, how internal fractures or discontinuities behave, and how loads pass through the lower rows. Such work helps researchers understand the chamber as an engineered environment under immense pressure. It does not reveal machinery, electrical systems, or evidence of industrial use. The mystery lies in construction, not lost technology. Red-painted quarry marks survive in some of the upper spaces, including work gang names associated with Khufu. These marks were never meant for public display. They belong to construction logistics, identifying crews, blocks, or work units. Their survival is one of the most direct links between the monument and the reign of the king whose name later traditions attach to it. The hidden writing is not ceremonial. It is administrative, almost casual, left by people working where no visitor was expected to stand. Farther above the Grand Gallery, modern scanning has detected a large void extending through part of the pyramid's core. Its exact shape and purpose remain unknown. It may be a single chamber, a series of spaces, or a structural feature connected with construction. Researchers have not yet reached it physically, and no responsible interpretation can describe its contents. Discovery of a void is not discovery of a tomb, library, treasure room, or machine. It is evidence of volume where dense masonry was expected. A smaller corridor behind the chevron-shaped masonry above the northern entrance has also been confirmed through multiple non-destructive techniques, roughly human-scaled and extending several meters inward. It may have reduced pressure over an entrance system, or served another construction-related purpose. Its existence demonstrates that the pyramid still contains unknown architectural features, but it does not overturn the monument's broader context. Hidden spaces can belong to engineering as easily as ritual. Taken together, the interior presents no simple plan. The subterranean chamber, ascending system, Queen's chamber, Grand Gallery, King's chamber, shafts, relieving spaces, and newly detected voids suggest revision, adaptation, and extraordinary control of stone. Some elements may have served practical construction needs. Others may have protected the burial. Still others may have connected the king symbolically with the celestial world. The Great Pyramid is therefore not mysterious because nothing about it can be understood. Much can. Its passages were measured, its stones quarried, its chambers built by organized crews, and its spaces arranged within a royal funerary complex. The deeper mystery is how many purposes could be compressed into one monument. Engineering protects ritual. Geometry expresses authority. Hidden chambers manage weight and secrecy. A sarcophagus anchors the architecture to death, while shafts and rising passages point beyond it. The exterior reduces the pyramid to a perfect shape. The interior restores the human process plans revised. Corridors sealed, chambers tested, stones marked, and solutions invented under loads almost beyond imagination. To understand how such work became possible, attention must shift away from the king's chambers and toward the thousands of people whose labor made those chambers exist. The builders of the pyramids did not vanish as completely as the kings hoped to endure. Their names survive in fragments, painted in red pigment on hidden stones, scratched into pottery, stamped onto seals, recorded in accounts, and buried in cemeteries near the monuments they raised. For centuries, popular imagination replaced them with faceless multitudes of slaves, driven beneath the sun by overseers and fear. The evidence from Giza tells a more complicated story. It reveals a workforce organized by the state, divided into teams, supplied on a massive scale, and drawn from a society in which service to the crown could be both obligation and source of status. Near the plateau lies a settlement often called Hayt el Ghurab, the Wall of the Crow. Its remains include long galleries, houses, bakeries, storage facilities, administrative buildings, animal bones, pottery, seals, and spaces where people ate, slept, worked, and counted supplies. This was not a temporary camp of starving captives. It was an organized settlement connected to one of the greatest construction projects in human history. The long gallery buildings may have housed groups of workers, perhaps rotating labor crews brought from different parts of Egypt. Nearby, larger residences may have belonged to administrators or supervisors. The arrangement reflects hierarchy, but also planning. Thousands of people could not appear at Giza and begin building without an enormous system behind them. Food had to arrive daily, water had to be carried or stored, tools needed repair, stone deliveries required scheduling, injuries had to be treated, work groups had to be assigned, recorded, and replaced. The workforce was probably not one uniform body. Permanent specialists lived alongside seasonal labourers, skilled masons shaped stone, quarry workers detached blocks from the bedrock, haulers moved them across prepared routes, surveyors checked lines and levels, carpenters made sledges, levers, scaffolding and boats. Metalworkers maintained copper tools. Potters produced containers by the thousands. Bakers and brewers fed the settlement. Scribes recorded rations, deliveries, absences, and progress. Agricultural rhythms made this possible. During the annual inundation, when fields were flooded and some farm work slowed, labour could be redirected toward royal projects. Men from villages throughout Egypt may have served in rotating groups as part of taxation or state duty. This service was probably demanding, and the freedom of individuals within the system should not be romanticized. The king's administration could command labour because it controlled land, taxation, and political authority. Yet compulsory service is not the same as the chattel slavery imagined in later legends. Work crews possessed identities of their own. Graffiti inside the Great Pyramid records names that appear to celebrate the king or the group itself. Crews were divided into larger units and smaller teams, perhaps creating loyalty and competition. A name painted on a block could help administrators track responsibility, but it also preserves a glimpse of collective pride. These workers did not leave philosophical accounts of their experience. What survives in the record suggests a world where labour was counted, organised, and given a place inside royal ideology. Food remains add unexpected detail. Archaeologists have found evidence of bread, beer, fish, cattle, sheep, and goats. Feeding a workforce at Giza required herds, grain fields, fishing, transport networks, and specialists far beyond the plateau. The pyramids were therefore built not only by those who touched stone, but by communities across the country producing surplus for the project. Cattle meat appears to have been available in quantities associated with high-status provisioning. This does not mean every worker ate lavishly every day, but it does challenge the image of a population sustained on scraps. Bread and beer formed dietary staples, while animal protein and fish added calories needed for heavy labour. The workers' settlement functioned as the visible end of an economic system reaching deep into the Nile Valley. Bread itself demanded industry. Grain was ground, dough prepared, loaves shaped, and ovens kept operating in repeated cycles. Beer required its own production sequence and large ceramic vessels. A construction project measured in decades could not rely on occasional deliveries. Provisioning had to become routine, predictable, and bureaucratic. The remains of the workers also reveal the physical cost. Skeletons from cemeteries near Giza show stress linked with strenuous activity, including spinal compression, joint wear, and healed fractures. Some individuals survived serious injuries long enough for bones to mend, suggesting access to care and continued support. Ancient treatment was limited, but survival after injury indicates that workers were not necessarily discarded when temporarily unable to labour. Their graves vary in size and quality. Some are modest, built from mud brick or rough stone. Others belong to supervisors and officials with more elaborate architecture. The location of these cemeteries near the royal complexes matters. Burial close to the pyramid may have carried honour, linking the worker permanently with the king and sacred landscape. People who helped create the monument could become part of the community surrounding it in death. No single model fully explains the entire workforce. Giza developed over generations, and the organisation used during Khufu's reign may not have remained identical under Khafre or Menkaure. Some labourers may have served temporarily. Others may have spent years on the plateau. Specialists could have moved from one royal project to another, carrying technical knowledge with them. The evidence remains incomplete because much of the settlement was reused, buried, or destroyed. One remarkable source comes not from Giza itself, but from papyri found at Wadi al-Jaf on the Red Sea coast. Among them is the diary of an official named Mera, who supervised a crew during Khufu's reign. His records describe the transport of fine limestone from Tura toward Akhet Khufu, the ancient name of the Great Pyramid. The entries are administrative rather than dramatic. They mention travel, deliveries, work assignments, and the movement of stone by boat. That ordinary tone is precisely what makes the document so powerful. It does not describe a miraculous construction technique. It describes schedules. The greatest pyramid appears not as an impossible object dropped into history, but as the result of repeated journeys, organized crews, ports, canals, officials, and days of work carefully recorded. Mira's crew moved limestone along waterways connected to the Nile and toward the pyramid site. The journal links quarrying, transport, and royal administration in real time. It also names officials associated with the project, showing that construction depended on a chain of command rather than the direct oversight of a single heroic architect. At the plateau, blocks quarried locally had to move over much shorter distances, but in far greater numbers. Crews cut trenches around sections of bedrock, separated stones, and transported them toward the rising pyramid. The quarries themselves altered the landscape, leaving scars and hollows that became part of the building site. Some stone was never moved at all. Builders incorporated the natural bedrock into the base, reducing the amount of masonry required and anchoring the monument directly to the plateau. Work was not a single continuous act of hauling. Each block passed through many hands. Quarrymen identified suitable stone. Toolmakers kept cutting edges usable. Transport teams prepared routes. Masons adjusted surfaces. Setters maneuvered blocks into final position. Surveyors checked alignment. Supervisors coordinated the pace so one group did not overwhelm another. The apparent simplicity of stacking stone conceals the complexity of managing time. A delay in food delivery could slow a crew. A broken boat could interrupt casing stone transport. A damaged sledge could block a route. Rising floodwater could help one phase of work and hinder another. The monument depended on thousands of small systems functioning together. This organization also strengthened the state that commanded it. By collecting grain, moving labor, managing quarries, and supporting specialists, the crown extended its reach into local communities. Pyramid building consumed resources, but it also trained officials, standardized procedures, and connected distant regions through a shared royal project. The monument was not only produced by centralized power, it helped create that power. For the workers, the pyramid must have appeared differently than it does to modern visitors. They did not see a finished ancient wonder. They saw noise, dust, unfinished courses, temporary structures, stone chips, ropes, boats, tools, animals, storage jars, and lines of people moving under supervision. The monument grew slowly enough to become part of daily life. Years passed, crews changed, officials were promoted or replaced. Some workers returned home after seasonal service. Others remained and watched the pyramid rise beyond anything their parents had known. The polished casing spread upward, erasing the rough construction beneath it. Individual stones disappeared into a single luminous surface. The king's name dominated the project, but the monument contained the lives of thousands who would never be remembered individually. Their effort became invisible by design. Once the casing was complete, the seams mattered less than the whole. Human labor was transformed into royal eternity. Yet the workers have returned through archaeology. Their houses, bones, ration jars, crew names, and administrative records restore them to the landscape. They show that the pyramid was not created by mystery, but by an extraordinary concentration of ordinary acts. The next problem is therefore not who built it, but how those people moved stone on such a scale, without the machines later ages assume must have been necessary. Stone does not become impossible because it is heavy. It becomes impossible when millions of pieces must be cut, moved, raised, aligned, and fitted in the right order for years without bringing the entire system to a halt. The builders of the pyramids did not solve this problem with one secret machine. They solved it through a network of methods, each suited to a different stage of the work quarrying close to the site, transporting valuable stone by water, dragging blocks on sledges, preparing roads, using ramps and levers, controlling slope and level, and organizing labor so that movement never depended on a single heroic effort. Most of the Great Pyramid's core limestone came from quarries on the Giza plateau. This reduced the greatest transport burden before it began. Instead of hauling every block across Egypt, workers cut much of the monument directly from the ground beside it. Quarry faces, extraction trenches, unfinished blocks, and tool marks preserve evidence of this process. Builders exploited natural layers in the limestone, isolating sections with channels and using stone pounders, copper tools, wooden wedges, and repeated blows to separate manageable blocks. Copper is softer than granite and many modern steels, which has encouraged the claim that Egyptian tools could not have shaped the materials found in the pyramids. That argument misunderstands how ancient stoneworking operated. Copper chisels could cut softer limestone when repeatedly sharpened. Harder stones could be worked with pounding stones made from materials such as dolerite. Sand-containing quartz acted as an abrasive in sawing and drilling, so the cutting action did not depend on copper alone. The tool held and directed the abrasive while the harder grains did much of the grinding. The process was slow, but slowness is not the same as impossibility. A project supported by large crews and years of continuous work can achieve results that seem unreasonable when imagined as the labor of a few people. Ancient construction depends less on speed at one point than on repetition across many work areas at once. Fine white casing limestone required a different system. It came from quarries at Tura, across the Nile from Giza, where high-quality stone could be extracted from underground galleries. Granite for the king's chamber and parts of other complexes travelled from Aswan hundreds of kilometres to the south. These blocks were not dragged overland for the entire distance. They moved primarily by boat. The Nile was Egypt's greatest transport route. Its annual rise changed the accessibility of ports, canals, basins, and construction sites. Barges could carry weights far beyond what road transport could manage efficiently. Recent study of the abandoned Ahramat branch of the Nile helps explain why so many pyramid complexes cluster along the western desert margin. Their valley temples and causeways once stood much closer to active waterways than the modern landscape suggests. Stone arriving by river could be unloaded near a harbour or basin and transferred toward the plateau. The diary of Mera shows that this system was not theoretical. His crew moved limestone from Tura to the Great Pyramid complex through a regulated network of waterways. The entries describe ordinary journeys rather than extraordinary machinery. Boats travelled, cargo changed hands, and deliveries were recorded. Once ashore, the stone still had to move across land. Egyptian images from later periods show large statues being dragged on wooden sledges by teams pulling ropes. In one famous scene, a person pours liquid in front of the runners. Experiments have shown that dampening sand can reduce friction when the moisture is controlled correctly, preventing loose grains from piling up in front of the sledge. The scene is later than the Great Pyramid, but it demonstrates a physical principle that would have been available long before. Sledges offered several advantages over wheeled vehicles on soft ground. Wide runners spread the load. Wooden components could be repaired. Ropes allowed many people to pull together. Roads could be prepared with compacted soil, timber, rubble, gypsum, or water, depending on the surface. The block did not need to move quickly. It needed to move predictably without damaging the route or exhausting the crew too soon. The most disputed part of the journey begins when the pyramid rises above ground. A block at the base is one problem. A block tens of meters higher is another. Ramps remain the most widely supported general solution, but the word can create a misleading image of one enormous straight embankment reaching the summit. Such a ramp would require a vast volume of material and become increasingly impractical as the pyramid grew. Builders may instead have used several ramp forms at different stages. A straight ramp could serve the lower courses, where wide access and heavy traffic were most important. Zigzagging ramps might climb one face. Ramps could wrap around parts of the monument or rise along its sides. Short, steep working ramps may have connected one level to the next. Levers could help lift and adjust blocks near their final positions. The precise arrangement at the Great Pyramid remains debated because temporary construction features were dismantled, reused, or buried beneath later activity. Evidence from other Egyptian sites shows that ramps were real and varied. Quarry roads preserve hauling routes. Mud brick and rubble ramps survive beside some monuments. At Hatnub, a later quarry ramp includes a central slope with stairways and post holes that may have supported ropes, allowing teams to pull heavy loads up a steep incline. This example is not a direct blueprint for Giza, but it shows that Egyptian engineers developed sophisticated hauling systems using ramps, posts, ropes, and coordinated force. The builders could also alter the shape of the work itself. Blocks used higher in the pyramid were often smaller than those in lower courses. Material did not need to follow one route from ground to summit throughout the entire project. Different faces, platforms, and staging areas could operate simultaneously. As the structure narrowed, the distance across each course decreased. Even though elevation increased, the casing created another challenge. Fine outer blocks had to be placed and dressed so that 4 sloping planes met with extraordinary consistency. Builders probably set casing stones alongside core masonry as construction rows, rather than wrapping a completed rough pyramid from bottom to top afterward. Final surfaces could then be dressed downward in stages as ramps and working platforms were removed. Surveying made the mass coherent. The base of the Great Pyramid is remarkably level despite its enormous area. Builders could establish a reference height using water in channels or basins, though the exact technique remains uncertain. They used cords, sighting tools, plumb lines, measuring rods, and right-angle methods to maintain straight lines. Repeated checking mattered more than any single instrument. Orientation presents one of their most impressive achievements. The pyramid's sides align closely with the cardinal directions. The builders may have observed circumpolar stars, tracked shadows, or combined several astronomical methods. Scholars still debate the exact procedure. What is clear is that orientation was deliberate, measured, and repeated with a precision requiring trained specialists rather than casual observation. Small errors could accumulate disastrously. A slight deviation at the base might shift the summit far from center. A changing slope could distort the faces. Poorly fitted blocks could concentrate pressure around chambers. Surveyors therefore had to coordinate horizontal level, vertical rise, face angle, corner position, and internal passages as the pyramid grew around them. The interior demanded even greater planning. The ascending passage, grand gallery, chambers, shafts, and granite beams could not be inserted after the surrounding masonry was complete. Their positions had to be established in advance and maintained as each course rose. Granite beams weighing many tons were transported, hauled, lifted, and placed high within the structure before later masonry enclosed them. None of this requires technology outside the archaeological record, but neither should it be reduced to brute force. The pyramid is a triumph of logistics, geometry, material knowledge, and incremental control. Human strength supplied energy, but planning prevented that energy from being wasted. Popular theories often search for one lost device because one device feels easier to imagine than a society capable of coordinating thousands of ordinary solutions. The evidence points instead toward accumulated knowledge. Quarrymen understood fractures in stone. Boat crews understood currents and load balance. Haulers understood friction. Surveyors understood alignment. Masons understood fit, pressure, and sequence. Officials understood schedules and provisions. The unanswered questions remain important. Archaeologists cannot yet reconstruct every ramp, every lifting stage, or every route used at every height. Temporary works leave poor traces, and later quarrying erased much of the construction landscape. But uncertainty about exact details does not mean the overall process is unknowable. The stones moved because roads, boats, sledges, ramps, ropes, levers, measurements, and people worked together. The greater mystery is not whether the Egyptians possessed a hidden machine. It is how effectively they transformed the entire Nile state into one. Once the monument stood complete, however, the machinery of construction disappeared. Ramps were removed. Roads fell silent. The polished surface concealed the methods beneath it. What remained was a sealed chamber, a granite sarcophagus, and a question that has become more persistent with every empty room discovered. Was this immense structure truly built to hold a dead king? The question sounds simple because the rooms are empty. No mummy of Khufu lies inside the granite sarcophagus. No royal treasure remains stacked beside him. No sealed doorway opens onto untouched funerary equipment. The Great Pyramid contains passages, chambers, shafts, barriers, and stonework of staggering complexity. Yet the object most people expect to find at the centre, a king preserved in his burial place, is missing. From that absence grows one of the most persistent doubts surrounding the pyramids. Perhaps they were never tombs at all. The doubt becomes stronger when the Great Pyramid is compared with later Egyptian burials. Tutankhamun's tomb contained shrines, coffins, furniture, chariots, food, clothing, jewelry, and objects intended to sustain royal existence after death. The chambers of the Great Pyramid seem almost bare by comparison. There are no surviving painted scenes, no carved spells, no elaborate funerary equipment, and no trace of a royal body. Yet the comparison crosses more than 1,000 years of changing burial practice. The absence of New Kingdom decoration inside an Old Kingdom pyramid cannot prove that the earlier monument served a different purpose. The strongest evidence begins with the architecture itself. The chamber traditionally called the King's Chamber contains a granite sarcophagus installed during construction. The ascending route was blocked by granite plugs. Passages could be sealed. The chamber was enclosed beneath massive structural spaces intended to protect it from the weight above. These features do not resemble an open public temple. They create a restricted interior centered on a stone container large enough for a body or nested coffin system. No royal inscription survives in the chamber identifying Khufu as its occupant, but the monument's connection with him does not depend on one missing label. Quarry marks in the hidden spaces above the chamber include crew names associated with Khufu. The pyramid's ancient name appears in administrative records from his reign. The diary of Mera describes deliveries to the project. Later, king lists and historical traditions connect the monument with him. The surrounding complex belongs to the same royal program. Outside the pyramid, the funerary evidence becomes more extensive. A mortuary temple stood against its eastern side. A causeway descended toward a valley temple near the ancient waterway. Boat pits, subsidiary pyramids, royal burials, mastaba fields, and spaces for offerings surrounded the central monument. Priests later served the cult of the dead king. Estates supplied provisions. The pyramid was not built as an isolated geometric object awaiting an unknown function. It stood within a landscape organized around royal death and continued ritual service. The word tomb, however, can be misleading. It suggests a container whose main purpose is to store a corpse securely. An Egyptian royal pyramid complex did far more. It received the funeral, transformed the king ritually, preserved his identity, supported offerings, maintained his cult, and made his authority visible after death. The body mattered, but it was one element within a larger process. Even if the mummy was later removed, destroyed, or never placed in the surviving chamber, the complex could still remain funerary in purpose. Looting provides the most obvious explanation for missing bodies and treasure. Egyptian tomb robbery began in antiquity and continued across millennia. Precious metals could be melted, wooden objects could decay or burn, textiles and food disappeared. Stone vessels were removed or broken. Mummies could be damaged while thieves searched for jewelry hidden among wrappings. Later builders quarried casing blocks, paving stones, temple walls, and accessible masonry. What modern visitors encounter is not the pyramid as its builders left it, but the residue of repeated entry, robbery, reuse, weathering, and destruction. The Great Pyramid may have been entered long before the first surviving historical descriptions of its interior. A rough tunnel traditionally associated with the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun was probably cut or enlarged in the early medieval period, but those diggers may already have encountered ancient access or signs of earlier penetration. Exactly when the original burial was disturbed remains unknown. The lack of a surviving mummy cannot identify the date of loss. Other pyramids strengthen the funerary interpretation. In the pyramid of King Unas at Saqqara, and in those of later rulers of the 5th and 6th dynasties, the chamber walls contain the pyramid texts. These spells protect the dead king, help him overcome dangers, join the gods, ascend to the sky, and continue existence beyond death. Their language provides direct written evidence that pyramid interiors belong to royal funerary transformation. The Great Pyramid predates these inscriptions. Its undecorated walls do not mean that funerary beliefs were absent. They may instead reflect an earlier tradition in which ritual knowledge was spoken, performed, written on perishable material, or embodied in architecture rather than carved permanently inside the chamber. The later texts reveal beliefs that had developed over time, but many of their central concerns, royal rebirth, ascent, protection, divine identity, and eternal sustenance, fit the broader purpose already visible in earlier complexes. Human remains have also been found in some Egyptian pyramids, though often disturbed, fragmentary, or difficult to date securely. Archaeology rarely offers the neat discovery people expect. Intrusive burials entered older monuments, robbers mixed deposits. Early excavators worked before modern recording standards. In some cases, remains thought to belong to a king were later questioned. This uncertainty should encourage caution, but it does not erase the funerary pattern. There are important exceptions. Some small provincial pyramids have no burial chambers at all. They may have served as royal markers, symbols of territorial presence, ritual monuments, or memorials connected with the crown. Their existence proves that the pyramid form could carry meanings beyond physical burial. It does not prove that the monumental royal pyramids with chambers, sarcophagi, ceiling systems, and mortuary temples were never intended for funerary use. A more complicated case appears in later periods, when a king could possess a pyramid complex while possibly being buried elsewhere. Senwosret III built a major complex at Djoser, yet evidence has led some scholars to suggest that his actual burial may have taken place at Abydos. Even here, the pyramid remains part of royal funerary culture, a symbolic monument, cult center, and physical grave did not always have to occupy precisely the same location. This possibility warns against treating every pyramid identically. Egypt built pyramids for centuries. Designs, materials, rituals, political conditions, and burial customs changed. Some monuments were completed, others were abandoned. Some contained actual interments, others may have represented burial symbolically. Some were robbed almost immediately, others remained active cult centers long after the king's body had vanished. The absence of remains therefore creates a genuine historical problem, but not the conclusion often drawn from it. Archaeologists cannot produce Khufu's mummy. They cannot reconstruct his complete burial equipment. They cannot prove the exact moment when the chamber was sealed or violated. The evidence remains incomplete. What they can show is a convergence of clues, a royal monument built in Khufu's reign, a granite sarcophagus placed within a protected chamber, passages designed for restriction and closure, temples for the dead king's cult, processional architecture, surrounding royal cemeteries, boat installations, later textual parallels, and a long Egyptian tradition of monumental burial. No single piece proves every stage of the funeral. Together, they make the funerary interpretation far stronger than theories requiring the entire surrounding context to be ignored. The Great Pyramid may have expressed cosmic order, solar rebirth, state power, and divine kingship. But these meanings do not compete with its role as a tomb. They explain why a royal tomb became so enormous. A dead king was not merely hidden inside stone. He was moved through ritual, established among the gods, supplied through temples, and made permanently present in the landscape. The chamber held the burial, but the temples kept the king alive. The chamber held the burial, but the temples kept the king alive. Once the pyramid was sealed, most people would never enter its interior again. The hidden passages, blocked corridors, and protected sarcophagus belonged to a restricted world from which ordinary movement was deliberately excluded. The eastern side of the monument served a different purpose. There, priests could approach, offerings could be presented, rituals could be repeated, and the dead king could remain an active participant in Egyptian life. This difference between sealed interior and accessible temple is essential. A royal funeral did not end when the body disappeared behind stone. It began a long relationship between the deceased ruler, the gods, the reigning king, the priesthood, and the estates assigned to support the cult. The pyramid preserved the king's transformed existence, while the mortuary temple provided a place where that existence could be maintained through action. At Giza, each main pyramid belonged to a sequence of connected structures. Near the river or an ancient branch of it stood a valley temple or harbour installation. From there, a covered causeway climbed toward the plateau. At its upper end, a mortuary temple rested beside the pyramid, normally against its eastern face. The architecture created a controlled journey from the fertile valley toward the desert monument, from movement by water to ascent on land, and from the public edge of the complex toward increasingly restricted sacred space. The lower temple may have played a role in receiving the royal funeral, purifying the body or preparing ceremonies before the procession moved upward. Exact rituals are difficult to reconstruct, especially at complexes where little of the valley temple survives. Scholars still debate which actions took place in each architectural zone. Yet the placement of these buildings along a deliberate route strongly suggests that the funeral unfolded as a sequence rather than a single event. The Nile was not merely a convenient highway for stone. It connected the monument with the life of Egypt. Boats carried people, offerings, officials, and ritual equipment toward the valley temple. The recently identified course of the ancient Ahramat branch helps restore this lost setting. Many pyramid causeways once descended toward water, much closer than the modern river, showing that the complexes were oriented toward arrival from the Nile rather than toward an empty desert. A royal body could therefore make its final approach by boat. Moving from the river that sustained Egypt toward the western desert associated with death, the procession then rose along the causeway, possibly passing beneath a roof illuminated by narrow openings or decorated with scenes now largely lost. The journey transformed geography into ritual. The king left the inhabited valley but did not disappear from the state he had ruled. At the upper end stood the mortuary temple. Its exact layout changed through time, but it commonly included an entrance hall, open court, storage rooms, offering spaces, statue chambers, and a sanctuary close to the pyramid. Here, priests maintained the royal cult. They burned incense, recited formulas, purified sacred spaces, presented food, and attended to images or symbolic forms through which the king could receive ritual service. The offerings were real before they became sacred. Bread had to be baked, beer had to be brewed, cattle, birds, grain, fruit, oil, cloth, and incense had to be produced, transported, counted, and stored. Temple ritual depended on farms, workshops, herds, boats, administrators, and labourers. A monument to eternity required a continuous economic foundation. Estates were assigned to support royal cults, and their names sometimes appear in reliefs as personified figures carrying provisions. This imagery makes the entire landscape seem to approach the king with gifts. Villages, agricultural domains, and regions of Egypt are converted into orderly lines of abundance. These scenes are religious, but they also reveal political structure. The land sustains the ruler after death just as it had sustained his court in life. Offerings were not understood as simple meals placed before an absent corpse. Ritual transformed them into nourishment accessible to the king's spiritual forms. Egyptian ideas of the person included several interacting aspects, rather than one soul separated neatly from a body. The preserved body, name, image, life force, individuality, and capacity for movement after death all required protection and renewal. The precise theology developed over centuries, but the underlying concern remained consistent. The dead must continue to receive what allowed identity to endure. Statues were crucial to this process. If the body was damaged or inaccessible, an image could provide another durable form for the king's presence. Temples contained royal statues in stone, some placed in niches or chambers where priests performed rituals before them. The statue was not treated merely as a portrait. Through ceremony, it could become a point of contact between the visible world and the transformed ruler. Khafra's Valley Temple offers one of the clearest examples. Several statues of the king were found there, including images carved from exceptionally hard stone. In the best-known example, Khafra sits upright on his throne while the falcon god Horus spreads protective wings behind his head. From the front, the divine bird is almost concealed, making the king appear independently powerful. From another angle, the god's protection becomes visible. The sculpture turns royal authority into a union between human form and divine support. Such statues complicate the idea that a temple beside a pyramid was simply a memorial hall. The king remained ritually effective. He could receive offerings, join the gods, protect the state, and serve as an ancestor of the reigning dynasty. Death changed his condition, but did not remove him from politics or religion. Priests maintained this relationship over time. Some held offices specifically connected with the cults of deceased kings. Their service could continue for generations, though many royal cults eventually weakened as resources shifted, institutions changed, or estates were absorbed elsewhere. The promise of eternity depended on human administration, and human institutions rarely remain unchanged forever. This creates one of the quiet contradictions of pyramid building. The monuments were designed to outlast memory, but their daily ritual systems required people. Stone could survive neglect, a cult could not. Once offerings ceased and priests stopped entering the temple, the pyramid remained visible, but part of its intended function fell silent. During the Old Kingdom, however, these cults could become powerful institutions. Priestly offices offered status and income. Temple estates controlled agricultural production. Families might inherit or exchange responsibilities. The dead king's household continued in altered form, sustained by officials who served a ruler no longer physically present. The causeway linked these activities with the valley below. Some causeways carried elaborate reliefs showing royal ceremonies, divine encounters, foreign peoples, agricultural abundance, or events associated with construction and kingship. Much has been destroyed or removed, and surviving fragments can be difficult to interpret. What remains suggests that the walls did not merely decorate a corridor. They narrated the king's ordered world. Djoser's complex had already established the idea of a permanent ceremonial environment, with courtyards and symbolic chapels preserving royal rituals in stone. At Giza, the pattern became more linear and closely tied to the river. Later, pyramid complexes expanded temple decoration and ritual organization still further. The architecture evolved, but the principle endured. The king's death required stages, spaces, personnel, and repeated acts. The temples also reveal why the pyramid could never be only private. The burial chamber was hidden, but the monument's social life unfolded outside it. Officials visited, priests worked, supplies arrived, ceremonies marked royal anniversaries and religious calendars. Families built tombs nearby. Generations encountered the king through architecture, images, names, and ritual rather than through his concealed body. Even the orientation of the mortuary temple on the eastern side carried meaning. The east was associated with sunrise and renewal, while the pyramid extended westward into the desert of the dead. Ritual took place where the returning sun met the king's monument. The exact symbolism varied and cannot be reduced to one formula, but the arrangement joined burial with regeneration. Seen from this perspective, the pyramid complex becomes a machine only in a metaphorical sense. It is a machine of ritual, memory, labor, and legitimacy. Waterways bring people and goods. The valley temple receives them. The causeway controls movement. The mortuary temple transforms provisions into sacred offerings. Statues provide forms for royal presence. The pyramid protects burial and anchors the entire system beneath one overwhelming image. Its purpose is not to generate physical energy, but to direct social and religious energy toward the survival of kingship. The dead ruler remains fed, named, represented, and connected to the gods. His successor gains legitimacy by maintaining that relationship. The state demonstrates its order by sustaining rituals beyond a single human lifetime. The temples therefore answer part of the question raised by the empty chambers. The king did not need to remain visible inside the pyramid for the monument to function. His presence was encountered in images, offerings, ceremonies, and the daily work of priests. The body was hidden because it required protection. The cult was accessible because it required repetition. Beyond these temple walls, however, the pyramid carried an even wider message. Its faces aligned with the earth, its peak entered the sky, and its luminous surface transformed the horizon. The ritual complex sustained one dead king, but the geometry began to speak about the order of the universe itself. A pyramid does not merely rise. It gathers the landscape into a single controlled form. Its base rests on the earth, its four sides face the horizons, and its summit narrows toward the sky. Millions of separate stones disappear into one shape so simple that it seems inevitable. To the ancient Egyptians, whose religion tied kingship to cosmic balance, such geometry could carry meanings far beyond appearance. The pyramid's square base establishes stability. Four sides correspond closely with the cardinal directions, binding the monument to the ordered structure of the world. The Great Pyramid's alignment is extraordinarily precise, differing only slightly from true north. Khafra's pyramid and other royal monuments show similar concern with orientation. This accuracy required careful observation, repeated measurement, and trained specialists capable of translating celestial or solar movement into line across the ground. Exactly how they did this remains debated. One possibility is that surveyors observed circumpolar stars, identifying north through the movements of stars that never disappeared beneath the horizon. Another method may have used the rising and setting positions of a star pair. Solar shadows could also establish east-west lines, especially when observations were repeated and corrected. No surviving manual explains the complete procedure, and no single reconstruction has gained universal acceptance. What is certain is that orientation mattered enough to justify remarkable effort. North carried particular significance in Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. The stars circling the northern sky never appeared to set, and later religious texts describe the dead king joining these imperishable stars. They offered a celestial image of existence without disappearance. A ruler associated with them did not sink permanently into darkness. He became part of a region that seemed to move eternally around a fixed center. The narrow shafts extending from the chambers of the Great Pyramid have encouraged attempts to connect particular passages with particular stars. Some proposed alignments appear suggestive, especially when compared with later religious language concerning Orion, Sirius, and the northern stars. Yet stellar positions change gradually through precession. Construction dates are not always exact, and the shafts themselves bend rather than following perfectly straight paths. Scholars still debate whether they were aimed at individual celestial objects, broad areas of the sky, or served several practical and symbolic purposes at once. The temptation to assign every angle to a named star should therefore be resisted. Ancient architecture can express cosmic connection without functioning as a precise astronomical instrument. A shaft opening toward the sky may have helped create a ritual path for the king's transformed spirit, even if it was not locked permanently onto one bright point. The sun offered another powerful language. Light crossed Egypt from east to west each day, disappearing into the western horizon before returning in the east. This repeated cycle made the sun an obvious model of death, passage, and regeneration. Pyramids stood on the western desert margin, where the sun descended toward the land of the dead. Their temples generally faced east, towards sunrise and renewed light. A completed pyramid would have interacted with the sun differently from the weathered structures visible today. Fine limestone casing covered the rough core. Its pale surface reflected intense light, especially in the clear desert atmosphere. At certain hours, the faces would have shifted from brilliant brightness to deep shadow with sharp precision. The monument did not simply sit beneath the sun. It changed as the sun moved, presenting a different form at dawn, midday, evening, and across the seasons. At its summit stood the pyramidion, the small capstone completing the structure. Surviving examples from later pyramids and obelisks show that such stones could carry inscriptions and solar imagery. Some may have been covered with metal or another reflective material. Though evidence for the exact finish of the great Giza summits is uncertain, if polished or gilded, the highest point could have caught sunlight and made the king's monument seem to ignite above the desert. The pyramid shape has often been interpreted as a representation of the sun's rays descending through clouds. This idea fits the growing importance of solar religion during the Old Kingdom, especially in dynasties after Giza. The ancient Egyptian word for pyramid may also have carried associations that remain linguistically debated. Yet it is difficult to prove that solar rays alone produced the form. The pyramid emerged gradually from stacked mastabas, construction experiments, and older royal burial traditions. Symbolism could develop alongside engineering rather than preceding it. Another possible association is the primeval mound. Egyptian creation traditions describe the first land rising from the waters of chaos, providing the stable place where ordered existence began. These traditions survive in several forms from later periods and should not be projected backward too mechanically. Still, an artificial stone mound rising above the floodplain would have offered a powerful image of permanence emerging from a changing world. The Nile renewed Egypt through seasonal inundation, but the desert plateau remained dry and stable above the flood. By placing the king's monument there, builders connected him with both environments. Below lay fertile land, settlements, cultivation, and water. Above stood the stone mountain, resistant to the cycles that governed ordinary life. The pyramid occupied the boundary between renewal and permanence. Its sacred geography extended beyond east and west. Causeways did not always run in perfectly straight east-west lines, because they had to respond to harbours, terrain, quarries, earlier tombs, and the shape of the plateau. Practical necessity and symbolism worked together. Egyptian builders did not create monuments in an abstract empty space. They inserted them into landscapes already carrying roads, cliffs, waterways, settlements, and ancestral burials. At Giza, the position of each pyramid also created relationships with the others. Certain viewpoints produce striking alignments between corners, temples, and the setting sun. One famous line through the southeast corners of the three main pyramids points toward the region of Heliopolis, the great center of solar worship. This may reflect deliberate planning, but topography and construction sequence complicate the interpretation. Scholars continue to debate whether the alignment was intended from the beginning or emerged as later kings fitted their monuments into the available plateau. Even without a single master plan, the completed landscape carried cosmic force. Three immense pyramids rose together above ordered cemeteries. Their sides tracked the cardinal directions. Their temples faced sunrise. Their causeways descended toward the Nile. Their peaks met the sky. The arrangement made royal succession look like part of the natural structure of the world. The king stood at the centre of this structure. In life, he was expected to maintain the balance of justice, ritual correctness, political order, and divine relationship. After death, the pyramid helped preserve him within that same order. Its exact geometry contrasted with the irregularity of the natural desert. Human measurement imposed stable form upon stone, mirroring the ruler's responsibility to impose order upon society. This does not mean the pyramid encoded every later mathematical constant attributed to it. Claims that its dimensions deliberately preserve advanced knowledge of the Earth. Universal energy, or hidden scientific prophecies usually depend on selective measurements, altered units, and coincidences chosen after the fact. The genuine achievement is impressive enough without forcing modern mysteries into ancient design. Egyptian surveyors possessed practical geometry. They could establish right angles, calculate slopes, divide land, maintain consistent courses, and reproduce proportions at enormous scale. Their mathematics served architecture, administration, agriculture, and ritual. When geometry gave the pyramid symbolic power, that power came from visible order rather than secret numbers intended for a distant civilization. The monument's orientation also made the king part of time. Dawn touched one face, sunset another. Shadows shifted across the casing. Stars revolved above the summit. Flood seasons returned below. Priests repeated offerings within the temples. The king's name passed through generations while his architecture remained aligned with cycles older than any dynasty. This was eternal power in the Egyptian sense, not a frozen refusal of change, but survival through repeated renewal. The sun disappeared and returned. The Nile rose and withdrew. The living king succeeded the dead one. Ritual transformed loss into continuity. The pyramid gave these cycles a permanent center. Its shape could therefore be simultaneously practical and sacred. Sloping sides carried weight downward. A broad base created stability. Orientation aided planning. Smooth casing protected the core. Yet the same features could express ascent, sunlight, creation, permanence, and cosmic order. Function and symbolism did not need to compete. The chambers remained dark, but the outer monument belonged to the sky. The body was concealed, while the king's transformed identity was projected across the horizon. Stone made him visible at distances where no human face could be recognized. Geometry replaced portraiture. The pyramid itself became the image of a royal eternity. Centuries later, that cosmic promise would move from silent architecture into written language. Inside smaller pyramids at Saqqara, walls would begin to speak, covering the king's burial chambers with spells describing ascent, transformation, danger, nourishment, stars, gods, and the difficult journey beyond death. Centuries after the Great Pyramid was sealed in silence, the walls of a royal burial chamber began to speak. In the pyramid of King Unas at Saqqara, hieroglyphs cover the limestone surfaces with dense columns of sacred language. The monument itself is far smaller than Khufu's, and from the outside it lacks the overwhelming grandeur of Giza. Inside, however, it preserves something the earlier pyramids do not: a written map of royal survival. These inscriptions are now known as the Pyramid Texts, the oldest large collection of religious writings from ancient Egypt. They first appear in the late 5th dynasty and continue in the pyramids of several kings and queens of the 6th dynasty. The texts were not composed all at once. They gather formulas, hymns, ritual instructions, protective utterances, and fragments of belief that likely circulated orally long before they were carved into stone. Some passages may preserve ideas inherited from much earlier royal ceremonies. Others reflect changing theology in the centuries after Giza. Their appearance does not mean that earlier kings lacked funerary beliefs. Khufu's walls may be blank, but his entire complex expresses preparation for death, transformation, and continued cult. The pyramid texts make those concerns explicit. They reveal the words that architecture alone could only imply. The dead king faces danger. He must awaken, stand, breathe, receive food, recognize the gods, cross hostile regions, and avoid beings capable of blocking his path. Doors must open, ferrymen must accept him, enemies must be repelled, parts of his body must be restored and identified with divine powers. The afterlife is not portrayed as automatic peace. It is a condition that must be secured through knowledge, ritual, and transformation. Some spells address the king directly, commanding him to rise from death. Others speak on his behalf, asserting his identity and authority. He is told that he has not departed as one who is dead, but as one who is alive. The distinction is central. Egyptian royal funerary religion does not attempt merely to preserve memory of a deceased ruler. It seeks to change his state of existence. The king may become an imperishable star in the northern sky, join the sun god in his daily journey, ascend on smoke from incense, climb a ladder raised by the gods, fly as a bird, or cross the heavens in a divine boat. These images do not form one perfectly consistent doctrine. Different traditions stand beside one another, sometimes overlapping and sometimes pulling in different directions. Scholars still debate how priests understood these variations. The texts seem less like a single theological handbook than a library of powerful possibilities. That variety reflects the richness of Egyptian religious thought. The king does not need only one route into eternity. He can rise with the stars, travel with the sun, enter the company of Osiris, and be reborn through multiple divine identities. Contradiction is not necessarily failure. Each image offers another form of protection. The stars play a prominent role. The king is welcomed among celestial beings that do not vanish below the horizon. He is associated with constellations, northern lights, and regions of the sky imagined as eternal. These passages help explain why orientation and upward movement mattered in pyramid architecture. They do not prove that every shaft in the Great Pyramid targeted one exact star, but they confirm that royal ascent into the heavens became a fundamental part of funerary belief. Solar imagery is equally strong. The king joins the sun god, travels in the solar boat, and participates in the daily defeat of darkness. Sunset becomes passage rather than destruction. Sunrise becomes proof that disappearance can be reversed. The pyramid's luminous casing, eastern temple, western desert setting, and narrowing summit all gain deeper resonance when viewed beside this language. Yet the king is also connected with Osiris, the divine ruler restored after death. In later Egyptian religion, Osiris becomes the central model of resurrection for a much wider population. In the pyramid texts, the relationship is still developing. The dead king can be identified with Osiris while also joining the sun and stars. His body lies in the earth, but his transformed forms move through the sky. Food remains essential. Many utterances concern offerings, appetite, and the restoration of bodily functions. The king must eat, drink, and receive provisions: bread, beer, meat, incense, oil, and cloth presented in the temple are translated into sacred nourishment through ritual speech. The material and spiritual worlds remain connected. eternity still depends on supplies. This connection explains why the text cannot be separated from temple activity. Priests likely recited many formulas during the funeral and later offering rituals. Carving them into the burial chamber preserved their power when human voices were absent. Written words created a permanent ritual environment around the king. The hieroglyphs themselves were treated carefully. Certain signs representing dangerous animals or threatening beings were sometimes altered, shortened, or shown without parts that might allow them to harm the deceased. Writing was not considered passive description. A carved image possessed potential force. By controlling the sign, scribes controlled the danger it represented. The arrangement of the texts within the chambers may also follow ritual logic. Spells associated with protection, offerings, resurrection, and movement appear in different architectural areas. The walls become active surfaces guiding the king from the sarcophagus chamber toward passages and imagined worlds beyond. The burial apartment is transformed into a landscape of language. One of the most surprising aspects of these texts is their physical intimacy. The Great Pyramid dominates the horizon, visible to entire communities. The inscriptions inside later pyramids were seen by almost no one after burial. They were not public propaganda in the ordinary sense. Their audience was the dead king, the gods, and perhaps the ritual specialists who prepared the chamber. This hidden writing reveals the private machinery beneath monumental power. Outside, the pyramid proclaims permanence. Inside, the texts acknowledge vulnerability. The king requires help. He can encounter locked gates, hunger, hostile beings, confusion, and decay. His divine status does not eliminate risk. It must be activated and defended. The texts also preserve traces of ritual acts performed around the body. Some passages correspond to offering ceremonies. Others may relate to the opening of the mouth, a rite intended to restore the deceased's ability to breathe, speak, see, hear, and receive nourishment. Tools touched the mummy or statue while words returned its senses. Architecture protected the body, but ritual made it effective. Over time, some of these royal formulas spread beyond the pyramid. Adapted spells appear in the coffin texts used by non-royal elites during the Middle Kingdom and later in the collection commonly called the Book of the Dead. This development is sometimes described as a democratization of the afterlife, though access still depended heavily on wealth and status. Beliefs once expressed primarily around kings became available to a broader section of society. The pyramid texts therefore reveal both continuity and change. They preserve old royal ideas while opening paths that later Egyptians would claim for themselves. The king remains exceptional, but the language of survival begins to escape the walls built to contain it. Their existence also clarifies why the pyramid cannot be reduced to a storage chamber. The burial space is designed as a theatre of transformation. The sarcophagus is not merely a stone box. It is the starting point from which the king rises, speaks, eats, travels, and joins divine society. The surrounding texts create paths no physical corridor could contain. Yet these spiritual promises remain tied to earthly power. Only a state with vast resources could quarry the stone, build the monument, endow the temple, train the priests, and carve thousands of signs in protected chambers. The king's ascent to the stars depended on scribes, artisans, farmers, administrators, and ritual specialists. The words promise that death cannot end kingship. The architecture ensures that the promise is visible. Together they transform one ruler's burial into a statement about the endurance of the entire political order. As the texts speak of the king rising among the gods, the pyramid outside continues to announce who possessed the power to build eternity on earth. The pyramid outside continues to announce who possessed the power to build eternity on Earth. That announcement was not hidden in a chamber or reserved for priests. It stood above the Nile Valley, visible from fields, roads, boats, settlements, quarries, and cemeteries. Even from a great distance, the monument declared that one ruler could command stone, labor, food, transport, ritual, and time on a scale beyond any ordinary household. Its power lay not only in size, but in the fact that thousands of separate human efforts had been reorganized into one royal form. To call the pyramid a political statement is correct, but incomplete. Modern language often separates religion from government, belief from economics, and ceremony from administration. In the Old Kingdom, these categories were tightly bound together. The king's authority was sacred because he maintained the relationship between the gods, the land, and society. His sacred position justified the collection of resources. Those resources made monumental ritual possible. Monumental ritual then demonstrated that the king truly possessed divine favor and earthly command. The pyramid stood at the center of this cycle. It was built for a dead ruler, but it strengthened the living state. Officials measured fields, collected grain, organized labor, controlled quarries, registered cattle, managed workshops, and supervised transport in order to complete the monument. Each administrative act reached from the palace into villages and estates across Egypt. The state became visible not only through decrees, but through the movement of people and goods toward the royal project. Grain grown far from Giza could feed workers on the plateau. Cattle raised in the delta could become rations or offerings. Copper from distant mining regions could be shaped into tools. Granite from Aswan could travel north by river. Fine limestone from Tura could cross the Nile to form a luminous skin. The pyramid concentrated the geography of Egypt into one place. Materials from across the kingdom were gathered, transformed, and stacked around the king. This process helped turn political unity into physical reality. Egypt had been governed as a unified state before the Great Pyramids, but unity always required maintenance. Local communities had their own traditions, elites, rivalries, and resources. A royal construction program could bind them to the center through taxation, labor service, administrative oversight, and shared participation in a national sacred enterprise. Whether every worker experienced that service as honor is impossible to know. Some may have taken pride in belonging to named crews and contributing to the king's monument. Others may have viewed the demand as exhausting obligation. The archaeological record preserves institutions more clearly than emotion. What survives suggests a system capable of combining coercion, reward, religious duty, and social prestige. The scale of the pyramids also communicated hierarchy. The king received an artificial mountain. Queens and royal relatives received smaller pyramids or mastabas nearby. Officials built tombs within ordered cemeteries according to rank and access. Craftsmen and labourers were buried in more modest graves. The landscape reproduced the structure of society in stone. Distance from the king mattered. Burial near a royal pyramid could bring prestige and perhaps spiritual benefit through proximity to the ruler's cult. High officials arranged their tombs along streets and avenues surrounding the complex. Their inscriptions later described titles, offices, family relationships, and service to the crown. Even after death, social identity remained tied to position within the royal order. The pyramid fields therefore functioned almost like eternal courts. The king occupied the dominant centre, while administrators, relatives, priests, and dependents remained arranged around him. The bureaucracy that served the palace in life reappeared as a cemetery community in death. Royal power extended beyond the ruler's lifetime because the people whose identities depended on him chose to remain close to his monument. Names reinforced this permanence. Pyramids received formal names expressing royal glory, appearance, or endurance. Khufu's complex was known as Akhet Khufu, often translated as the horizon of Khufu. The name transformed the building into more than a physical object. It became a place where the king appeared, rose, or joined the eternal horizon. Administrative documents referred to these named institutions. Priests served them, estates supplied them, settlements and work groups were connected to them. The pyramid existed not only as stone, but as an organization with personnel, property, and economic life. Long after construction ended, the monument continued to structure human activity. Royal cults could also become political tools for later generations. A new ruler strengthened legitimacy by honoring his predecessors, especially those from his own dynasty. Maintaining an earlier king's temple linked succession with continuity. Neglecting or appropriating an older cult could signal changes in power. The dead remained politically useful because ancestry helped justify rule. Yet eternal institutions were vulnerable. Temple estates could lose resources. Priestly offices could become hereditary and drift away from central control. Endowments could be redirected. Economic demands from multiple royal cults accumulated as each new king built his own complex. A system designed to preserve every ruler forever risked creating more obligations than the state could sustain. This tension appears gradually. During the height of pyramid building, the crown could mobilize extraordinary resources. Later, the monuments became smaller, while temples and inscriptions grew more elaborate. The change did not mean that kings had stopped valuing eternity. It may reflect shifts in economy, administration, religious emphasis, and the balance of power between the royal court and provincial elites. The greatest pyramids belonged to a moment when centralized authority was unusually concentrated. Their size records confidence that the state could command labor year after year, that the king's cult deserved permanent support, and that future generations would continue to recognize the order embodied in the monument. That confidence can appear absolute when viewed through surviving stone. But the pyramid also reveals dependence. The king required workers. Workers required food. Food required farmers and stable floods. Temples required estates. Estates required administration. Priests required income. The monument advertised supreme power, while quietly exposing the network that made such power possible. Even its visual effect depended on maintenance. Casing stones had to remain intact. Temple courts had to be cleared. Offerings had to arrive. Statues had to be protected. Names had to be spoken. Eternity was never automatic. It was produced repeatedly through human action. This does not diminish the pyramid's symbolic force. It makes that force more understandable. The monument convinced because it transformed unstable systems into the appearance of permanence. Harvests varied, officials died, dynasties changed, and political alliances shifted. But the pyramid seemed unmoved. It presented royal order as something as natural and enduring as the desert horizon. The king's body could disappear. His name could survive in the monument. His cult could weaken. His pyramid could still dominate the landscape. Stone preserved the image of power even after the institutions behind it had changed. For later rulers, this was both inspiration and warning. Building beside an ancient pyramid meant claiming connection with greatness, but also competing with a past that could not easily be surpassed. Khufu's monument made every later royal tomb look smaller. The fourth dynasty had turned kingship into geography. Long after the workers left, The pyramids continued to influence how Egypt imagined its own past. They became ancestral landmarks, sacred places, quarries, tourist destinations, subjects of legend, and measures of vanished authority. Each age interpreted them differently, but none could ignore them. Their political message was therefore more durable than any specific decree. The pyramid said that royal power could organize society, dominate the landscape, survive the king, and place one human name among the forces of nature. Yet precisely because the message was so overwhelming, later observers began to doubt the ordinary human systems behind it. Empty chambers, hidden corridors, and lost casing invited increasingly extravagant explanations. The monument built to make power visible eventually became a screen onto which other ages projected their own mysteries. Beneath those projections, the archaeological evidence remains more restrained and more remarkable, a funerary complex created by a centralized society, shaped by religion, supported by administration, and designed to make kingship appear eternal. The monument built to make power visible eventually became a screen onto which other ages projected their own mysteries. The less that survived of the original burial, the easier it became to replace missing evidence with imagination. Empty chambers encouraged hidden chamber theories. Precise masonry inspired claims of lost machines. Astronomical alignments became maps of vanished knowledge. The absence of an intact royal mummy was treated not as evidence of robbery, disturbance, or incomplete preservation, but as proof that Egyptologists had misunderstood the entire purpose of the pyramids. Some uncertainty is real. Archaeologists do not know the function of every passage, niche, shaft, cavity, or construction mark. The Great Pyramid contains spaces whose original purposes remain debated. The Grand Gallery is still not fully explained. The Queen's Chamber shafts end in small blocked spaces. The large void detected above the gallery has not been physically entered. A corridor behind the northern face was confirmed only recently. At Menkaur's pyramid, non-destructive surveys have identified air-filled anomalies behind the eastern face. Khafre's pyramid is being examined with newer muon imaging systems that may reveal structural details not yet known. These discoveries matter because they show that even the most studied monuments can still contain surprises. They do not, however, grant equal credibility to every explanation. A void is evidence of empty space. It is not automatically a library, treasure chamber, machine room, secret temple, or entrance to an underground city. Scientific instruments can reveal differences in density, electrical resistance, or acoustic response, but they cannot name the purpose of a feature without archaeological context. This distinction often disappears in popular reporting. A measured anomaly becomes a hidden room. A hidden room becomes a sealed chamber. A sealed chamber becomes a lost archive. By the time the claim circulates widely, the cautious language of the original research has vanished. The North Face corridor in the Great Pyramid provides a clear example. Muon imaging first suggested an unknown space behind the chevron-shaped masonry, above the original entrance. Later work combining radar, ultrasound, and electrical methods confirmed a corridor-like void. Researchers could eventually inspect part of it with a camera. The discovery was genuine and important, yet its purpose remains uncertain. It may relieve pressure above an entrance system, belong to an abandoned architectural plan, or have served another construction-related function. Nothing found there demonstrates that the pyramid had a non-funerary industrial purpose. The same restraint applies to the anomalies detected behind Menkaur's eastern face. Their air-filled character raises the possibility of an unknown passage or entrance. but several explanations remain open. They could be cavities left during construction, spaces designed to reduce load, ritual features, or parts of a route never completed. Until direct investigation provides more evidence, any confident description exceeds what the measurements show. The most dramatic recent claims concern supposed structures extending deep beneath the Giza plateau. Satellite radar images have been interpreted by some researchers as revealing enormous shafts, chambers, and a hidden city under Khafra's pyramid. The scale of the claim is extraordinary, but the corresponding archaeological evidence has not matched it. Specialists in radar and remote sensing have questioned whether the method can penetrate rock to the advertised depths or produce the detailed underground architecture described. No excavation, borehole, or independent survey has confirmed a buried city. This does not prove that nothing remains beneath Giza. The plateau contains tombs, shafts, natural fissures, quarry cuts, tunnels, foundations, and buried structures accumulated over thousands of years. Unknown features are entirely plausible. What remains unsupported is the leap from uncertain remote sensing patterns to a vast technological complex hidden beneath the pyramids. The idea of the pyramid as an energy machine follows a similar pattern. Its advocates point to granite in the king's chamber, traces of minerals, narrow shafts, precise geometry, and the presence of underground water in the wider region. These elements are then combined into proposals involving electricity, resonance, chemical reactions, microwave transmission, or atmospheric energy. The details differ, but the conclusion is usually the same. The monument was not primarily funerary but functional in a technological sense. No physical evidence supports such a system. There are no surviving conductors, generators, insulated connections, fuel installations, chemical residues consistent with continuous industrial operation or distribution networks leading from the pyramid to settlements. The chambers do not contain machinery foundations or maintenance access appropriate to a working power plant. Granite can resonate, but so can many solid materials. Resonance alone does not demonstrate purposeful energy production. Shafts can channel air or sound, but their existence does not transform the monument into a machine. The king's chamber also shows evidence of structural concern rather than industrial design. Its granite walls, beams, and stacked spaces above were built within an immense load. Modern ultrasonic and engineering studies examined fractures, joints, block arrangement, and the movement of stress through the chamber. Such research makes the architecture more technically interesting, but it does not reveal an ancient generator. The structure was designed to endure pressure and protect a central space. That is entirely compatible with a royal burial chamber. Other theories imagine the pyramid as a water pump, hydraulic device, grain store, astronomical observatory, initiation center, or repository of scientific knowledge. Some arise from real features. The plateau once stood near active Nile branches. Internal passages have varying slopes. The monument is carefully oriented. Later cultures did use monumental spaces for rituals unrelated to their original purpose, yet a plausible isolated feature does not establish an overall function. A grain store requires accessible storage areas, repeated loading routes, ventilation, and evidence of stored material. The Great Pyramid offers narrow, difficult passages and chambers sealed within masonry. A public initiation temple would require sustained access, circulation, and ritual spaces different from a blocked internal system. An observatory needs clear lines of sight and working positions, not corridors enclosed beneath millions of tons of stone. The broader funerary complex explains more of the evidence with fewer unsupported assumptions. Claims of machining beyond ancient capability often focus on hard stone vessels, granite surfaces, drill marks, and tightly fitted joints. Some objects show remarkable craftsmanship and deserve serious study. Egyptian artisans achieved precision through skilled labor, abrasives, pounding stones, sawing, drilling, polishing, and repeated measurement. Experimental archaeology does not reproduce every artifact easily, and questions remain about workshop organization and exact tool combinations. Difficulty of replication, however, is not proof of vanished industrial technology. The alien builder theory goes further by removing Egyptian society from its own achievement. It treats the pyramids as too advanced for the people whose quarries, settlements, tools, administrative records, crew names, transport documents, and unfinished monuments survive around them. This theory does not solve the construction problem. It merely replaces known human evidence with an invisible outside agent. Astronomical theories require similar care. The pyramids are genuinely aligned with remarkable precision, and celestial symbolism clearly mattered in Egyptian religion. The Giza layout may contain intentional relationships with solar and stellar phenomena, but proposals that the three pyramids form an exact terrestrial copy of Orion's belt depend on selective scaling, altered viewpoints, and assumptions that remain disputed. A broad association between the king and Orion is plausible in later religious texts. A precise master map of the constellation is much harder to demonstrate. The strongest interpretation is not the one that removes mystery, but the one that keeps uncertainty in proportion. Archaeology can acknowledge that a corridor is unexplained without calling it a power conduit. It can admit that a void is inaccessible without filling it with treasure. It can recognize remarkable engineering without inventing machines for which no parts survive. There is also a deeper reason alternative theories persist. The accepted explanation seems emotionally too ordinary. A tomb sounds small, a temple sounds familiar, a political symbol sounds abstract. Yet the Egyptian pyramid was never merely any one of these. It was a burial place, ritual institution, economic center, cosmic image, ancestral monument, and statement of state power combined. Its true function is not less extraordinary than a machine. It is more complex. The missing mummy remains missing. Unknown spaces remain unknown. Some design choices may never be explained with certainty, but gaps in evidence are not empty invitations to any theory. They are limits that must be respected. The pyramids still hold secrets, though perhaps not the secrets most often advertised. Their mysteries lie in changing plans, lost rituals, forgotten work methods, vanished temple economies, and architectural decisions whose meanings were never written down. These are quieter mysteries than ancient power plants or hidden cities, but they arise from the evidence rather than from the desire to escape it. And while speculation grows around what may still be concealed, another mystery waits in plain sight. If pyramids were so effective at expressing divine kingship, why did Egypt eventually stop building them on the scale that made Giza immortal? If pyramids were so effective at expressing divine kingship, why did Egypt eventually stop building them on the scale that made Giza immortal? The answer is not that Egyptians suddenly lost the ability, abandoned belief in the afterlife, or discovered that pyramids had failed. Pyramid construction continued for centuries after Khufu, Khafre, and Menkore. What changed was the balance between resources, religious priorities, political power, security, and the practical lessons learned from monuments that were meant to last forever. but proved impossible to protect completely. The first change is visible in size. After the 4th dynasty, royal pyramids generally become smaller. Their internal architecture can remain complex and their temples may grow richer in decoration, but the overwhelming stone mass of Giza is not repeated. This shift does not necessarily indicate simple decline. It may reflect a different allocation of royal investment. More resources move toward mortuary temples, inscriptions, ritual programs, priesthoods, and the institutions required to maintain the king's cult. A smaller pyramid could still dominate its local landscape, especially when placed on high desert ground or surrounded by a carefully planned complex. The form remained sacred even when its dimensions changed. What mattered increasingly was not only the quantity of stone, but the ritual system organized around it. The pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties often used cores made from smaller blocks, rubble, and less carefully laid masonry beneath fine outer casing. When later generations removed the casing, the exposed cores deteriorated rapidly. Many now appear as low mounds rather than sharp geometric mountains. Their ruined condition can create the illusion that later Egyptians no longer knew how to build properly. In reality, they were making different choices about cost, speed, material, and visible finish. While the casing remained intact, these monuments could still look smooth and complete. Ancient builders did not design them to be viewed after centuries of quarrying. They expected the outer surface to protect the less regular core. Once that surface was stripped away, the hidden economy of construction became visible. Royal power was also becoming less concentrated. Provincial administrators gained influence, local elites accumulated wealth, and offices could become hereditary. The court still commanded significant resources, but the political structure of Egypt was growing more complicated. Monumental projects depended on surplus, stable taxation, reliable labor, and strong central administration. Any weakening in these systems affected what the crown could sustain. The problem extended beyond construction. Every royal complex required long-term support. Priests needed salaries or land, offerings required estates, temples needed maintenance, storage rooms needed provisions. As generations of kings founded new cults, the number of institutions claiming permanent resources increased. Eternity became expensive because each dead ruler expected the living state to keep paying for it. Land assigned to temples could gradually move beyond direct royal control. Priestly offices created their own networks of privilege. Endowments intended to preserve the authority of kings might strengthen institutions that competed with the crown. The very system designed to make kingship permanent could weaken the concentration of power that had made the Great Pyramids possible. Environmental stress may have deepened these pressures. Toward the end of the Old Kingdom, variations in Nile flooding may have disrupted agriculture and reduced available surplus. The exact relationship between climate, low floods, political fragmentation, and the collapse of central authority remains debated. No single explanation fully accounts for the end of the Old Kingdom. Yet a state dependent on predictable harvests was vulnerable when those harvests failed repeatedly, or when local authorities controlled relief more effectively than the royal centre. By the First Intermediate Period, political unity fractured. Competing rulers claimed authority from different regions. Large royal pyramid projects became difficult in a landscape where the crown could no longer command the same national workforce or secure resources from the entire Nile Valley. The end of giant pyramid building was therefore tied not only to changing beliefs, but to changing state capacity. When Egypt was reunified, kings returned to pyramid construction. Middle Kingdom rulers built complexes at places such as Lisht, Dashur, Hawara, and Elahun. These monuments prove that the pyramid had not lost its funerary meaning, yet their building methods and political context differed from those of the 4th dynasty. Some Middle Kingdom pyramids used mud brick or loose stone cores reinforced with internal walls and covered by limestone casing. This could reduce the amount of high-quality masonry required while preserving the pyramid's outer appearance. The choice was economical and technically practical, but it left the monuments more vulnerable once the casing was removed. Their internal passages became increasingly elaborate, sometimes with concealed entrances, multiple barriers, false routes, and heavy blocking stones. These features reveal a growing concern with tomb robbery. The pyramid's visibility, once essential to royal power, had become a security problem. A giant monument announces where the royal burial lies. Even if the entrance is hidden, the pyramid points toward the treasure beneath it. Priests, builders, guards, and officials knew that valuable objects entered the complex. Over time, political disorder, corruption, or desperation could turn knowledge into opportunity. No amount of masonry could guarantee secrecy when the tomb itself was the most visible object in the landscape. Robbery did not always occur centuries later. Some royal burials may have been violated relatively soon after interment. Thieves tunneled around plugs, broke through walls, and exploited weaknesses in passage systems. Tomb security became a contest between architects and people who understood architecture. This contradiction eventually favoured another strategy. Instead of placing the king beneath a monumental form visible for kilometres, later rulers increasingly separated the hidden burial from the public mortuary temple. During the New Kingdom, royal tombs were cut into the cliffs and valleys near Thebes. Their entrances could be concealed in remote desert landscapes, while temples dedicated to the king's cult stood separately on the edge of cultivation. The Valley of the Kings represents not the abandonment of royal funerary tradition, but its reorganization. The body moved into secrecy. The cult remained visible. Decoration that had once spread through pyramid temples and later burial chambers expanded across the walls of rock-cut tombs. Texts, images, maps of the underworld, solar journeys, divine encounters, and protective spells surrounded the king in far greater detail than the blank chambers of Giza. The mountain itself may have replaced the constructed pyramid. The Theban landscape included a natural peak rising above the royal valleys, roughly pyramidal in profile from certain viewpoints. Whether this resemblance carried deliberate symbolic weight is still debated, but the setting offered a powerful combination of hidden access and monumental geography. The ruler could be buried beneath a natural mountain without announcing the exact location of the tomb. Even this system failed to defeat robbery. Most New Kingdom royal tombs were eventually entered and stripped. Priests later moved surviving mummies into concealed caches to protect them. The problem was never solved completely because funerary wealth attracted danger wherever it was placed. The decline of pyramid building therefore cannot be explained by one disaster or one change in belief. It emerged from accumulated pressures. The greatest pyramids consumed extraordinary resources. Their cults demanded permanent support. Political authority became less centralized. Construction methods shifted. Economic and environmental instability affected state capacity. Monumental visibility conflicted with burial security. Religious expression increasingly emphasized decorated chambers, temple ritual, and underworld journeys rather than sheer mass. Yet the pyramid did not disappear from Egyptian imagination. Smaller pyramids crowned private tombs. Pyramidions completed monuments and obelisks. The form appeared in Nubia, where later kingdoms built steep-sided pyramids for royal burials. The geometry remained connected with death. sunlight, ascent, and sacred power long after Egypt's kings stopped building artificial mountains on the scale of Giza. The Great Pyramid age faded because no institution, however confident, can repeat its most expensive expression forever. The monuments remained, but the society that produced them changed around them. Their survival created the impression of an eternal system, while history continued to move. By the time royal burials disappeared into hidden valleys, the central lesson of the pyramid had already become permanent. A king's tomb could be more than a grave. It could organize a landscape, shape an economy, guide ritual, express cosmic order, and make political authority visible across generations. The form changed, but the ambition endured. Across nearly 3,000 years of Egyptian history, royal burial architecture repeatedly searched for ways to make death compatible with continuity. The pyramid was the most visible and audacious expression of that search, but it was never reducible to one purpose. It protected a burial, supported rituals, organized labor, shaped sacred geography, maintained a royal cult, and presented kingship as part of the permanent order of the world. Asking whether it was a tomb, a temple, or a symbol of eternal power creates a choice the ancient monument itself refuses to make. At the center was usually death. A king had died, or his eventual death was being prepared for years in advance. Chambers were cut or constructed, sarcophagi were installed, entrances were blocked, passages were designed to restrict access. Priests prepared rituals of transformation. The body, or at least an architecture created for the body, occupied the protected heart of the complex. This funerary purpose remains the strongest explanation for the royal pyramids of the Old Kingdom. It is supported not by one isolated clue, but by an entire pattern: burial chambers, stone sarcophagi, ceiling systems, mortuary temples, causeways, valley temples, subsidiary burials, boat installations, offering cults, royal cemeteries, and later, pyramid texts. The absence of an intact mummy in the Great Pyramid is important, but it cannot erase the surrounding system. Yet calling the pyramid a tomb can still feel insufficient because the modern word is too narrow. A tomb is imagined as a place where remains are stored and mourners occasionally visit. The Egyptian pyramid complex was designed to change the dead king's condition. It provided the spaces, images, offerings, words, and institutions through which he could become an effective being among the gods. The burial chamber concealed him, the temple made him accessible, the causeway connected him with the Nile Valley. The pyramid projected his transformed identity onto the horizon. These functions did not operate separately. Each depended on the others. The temple was therefore not an optional attachment to the tomb. It was the active face of the royal afterlife. Priests entered spaces that the public burial chamber denied them. Food arrived from estates, incense burned, statues received attention. The king's name was spoken and his identity renewed. While his body remained hidden in darkness, his cult continued in light. This division explains why the pyramid itself could be sealed permanently without becoming useless. Its interior was not meant for repeated public visitation. The ritual life of the complex unfolded outside it. The king did not need worshippers to approach his sarcophagus. They approached his temple, image, offering place, and name. The pyramid was also a symbol, although symbolism did not replace practical function. Its broad base and rising faces could evoke stability, ascent, sunlight, creation, or the emergence of ordered land from chaos. Its cardinal orientation joined royal architecture with the horizon and sky. Its pale casing reflected the sun. Its summit formed a single point above millions of blocks, turning human labour into a shape of apparent unity. No surviving Egyptian text from Khufu's reign provides a complete explanation of that geometry. Scholars still debate which meanings were already fully developed during the Fourth Dynasty, and which became clearer later. The evidence remains incomplete. It is likely that the form accumulated associations over time, allowing different generations to see solar, stellar, funerary, and political meanings within the same structure. Egyptian religion did not require one exclusive interpretation. A king could join the sun, become an imperishable star, identify with Osiris, and remain present through his statue and cult. A pyramid could protect his remains, represent a sacred mound, provide a path of ascent, and declare his authority. Multiple meanings strengthened one another rather than producing contradiction. The monument was equally an expression of power, though not merely because it was large. Its construction showed that the crown could organize Egypt. Quarrymen separated stone, boat crews moved it along the river, farmers produced surplus, bakers and brewers fed workers, scribes recorded deliveries, surveyors established lines, priests defined sacred requirements, administrators coordinated the entire system. The king's authority became visible through this concentration of effort. Grain from distant fields, granite from Aswan, limestone from Tura, copper from mining regions, timber, rope, livestock, and human skill all converged on the royal horizon. The pyramid turned a political network into a physical object. It also helped strengthen that network. Labour groups were organised. Transport routes were improved. Officials gained experience. Standards of measurement and record-keeping were reinforced. Communities across Egypt became connected to the centre through taxation, service, provisioning, and ritual obligation. This power was not gentle merely because the builders were not the stereotypical slave gangs of popular legend. The state could demand labour and resources on a formidable scale. Participation may have brought food, status, community, or religious meaning, but it also reflected hierarchy. The monument reveals both cooperation and command. Its cemeteries preserve that hierarchy permanently. The king occupies the artificial mountain. Queens and royal relatives lie nearby. Officials arrange their mastabas according to rank and access. Workers receive smaller graves closer to the settlement and construction landscape. The society that built the pyramid reproduced itself around the dead ruler. Yet the monument's power was not absolute. The cult depended on resources that could fail. Priests could disappear, temples could be abandoned, casing stones could be quarried, chambers could be robbed, names could be forgotten or misread. Even the most stable architecture existed within changing political and human systems. This fragility is one reason the pyramids remain compelling. They succeeded and failed at the same time. They failed to preserve many royal bodies and treasures. They failed to keep every cult active forever. They failed to protect their polished surfaces from removal. But they succeeded in making the kings who commissioned them impossible to ignore. Khufu's body is lost, yet his horizon remains. Djoser's burial was disturbed, yet his stepped monument still marks the moment stone began to climb. Sneferu's experiments still display the mistakes and solutions that produced the true pyramid. Unis's weathered monument still protects words intended to raise a king among the gods. New technology continues to find corridors, cavities, fractures, and structural details hidden within the stone. Some discoveries will clarify construction, others may create new puzzles. it is possible that unknown chambers or passages remain. Archaeology should remain open to surprise without allowing surprise to become fantasy. The monuments do not need to be power plants, star maps left by outsiders, or entrances to a technological city in order to remain mysterious. Their confirmed purpose is already profound. They were built to manage the most dangerous transition in the political universe, the death of the person who embodied divine kingship. A king had to die without allowing kingship itself to die. His human body weakened, but his sacred identity had to continue. His successor needed legitimacy. The gods required ritual. Society required order. The pyramid complex brought these concerns together and translated them into stone, ceremony, labor, food, language, and landscape. That is why no single label is enough. The pyramid was a tomb because royal burial anchored it. It was part of a temple system because ritual sustained the dead king. It was a cosmic symbol because its form linked earth, horizon, sun, and sky. It was an instrument of power because its construction and maintenance displayed the reach of the state. It was also a memory machine, not in a mechanical sense, but in the human one. It forced generations to confront the name, scale, and ambition of a ruler who no longer lived. Even when priests stopped speaking his name, the monument continued to occupy the horizon. Even when robbers emptied the chambers, the architecture continued to imply that something of enormous importance had once been placed inside. The Great Pyramids are therefore not made less meaningful by accepting their funerary purpose. They become more meaningful when burial is understood in the way their builders understood it, not as disposal of the dead, but as the reconstruction of identity, authority, and cosmic order after death. The sarcophagus, temple, causeway, river branch, worker settlement, offering estate, star-filled sky, and gleaming outer surface all belong to the same answer. The king was buried, transformed, worshipped, and monumentalized. His death became architecture. His architecture became landscape. His landscape became the enduring image of Egypt itself. Long after the last offering was placed before a royal statue, sand moved through the abandoned courts. Roofs collapsed. Stone was taken away for other buildings. Names faded from temple walls, and entrances once sealed with care opened into darkness. The people who understood every gesture, every chamber, and every sacred word gradually disappeared, leaving the monuments without their original voices. The pyramids remained. They watched the river change its course and old harbours vanish beneath fields and settlement. They stood through dynasties that remembered their builders, dynasties that misunderstood them, and foreign rulers who saw them as relics of an already ancient world. Travellers arrived with measuring cords, prayers, chisels, cameras, theories, and questions. Each generation carried away a different Egypt. What survives is never the whole story. The bright casing is mostly gone. The burial equipment has vanished. The ceremonies cannot be reconstructed in every detail. The king's body may be lost, and the workers' individual lives appear only in brief marks, healed bones, broken jars, and forgotten rooms. Time preserves stone more easily than intention. Still, certain outlines remain clear. A society gathered around death and refused to treat it as simple disappearance. People cut mountains into blocks, moved them across water and desert, raised them toward the sky, and created places where memory could continue after the human voice had stopped. The king sought eternity for themselves, but the monuments preserved something wider. They preserved evidence of the workers who hauled stone, the scribes who counted rations, the priests who carried offerings, the surveyors who watch the stars, and the generations who believe that order could be renewed even after loss. At evening, the pyramids darken before the sky does. Their sunlit faces become silhouettes, and their sharp forms soften into the desert horizon. The chambers inside remain silent. The ancient rituals do not return. Yet the monuments continue to perform one final function their builders may have understood better than anyone. They remind the living that every civilization attempts to speak beyond its own lifetime, and that even the strongest voice reaches the future only in fragments. Above the Nile Valley, those fragments still rise in stone,